As we get ready for the holiday season, we wanted to give you a special present early. Backed by popular demand, Brian Cantrill is here to give us his latest rants, specifically on Linux interfaces. Oh my. All this in the week's headlines coming right up on BSD Now. BSDNow 117, The Cantrill Strikes Back, recorded November 24th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
We're glad to have you guys with us this week. We got Thanksgiving coming up and a lot of stuff happening. I know we're going into the holidays, but boy, it doesn't seem like BSD ever slows down. There's still a lot of stuff happening.
Sometimes the holidays is the only time you get free time out of work to actually work on stuff.
That's true. And we have done a couple releases around that time too, which I think the most painful one we did on PC-BSD was the week between Christmas and New Year. I don't recommend that as a release week if you guys can avoid.
I remember a couple of years ago when Colin Percival was still the security officer, he was like apologizing for sending out like 6 security notices on like Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve or something like that.
That one caught us as well.
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll see. Maybe there'll be a little less of that this year. But we switched to OpenNTPDD, so maybe that'll cut down on some of our security notices this time around. Okay, but we'll get into that, as it happens, as the holidays get closer. But of course, we got some news today, and we're going to have a great interview with Brian Cantrill. So you're going to have to stick around for that. I'm hopeful it'll be just as epic as our last one, which I think may still be our highest rated interview ever or whatever. It was definitely a popular one. Okay, so let's get right into the headlines this week. So first up, we have a story about a Dragonfly, and it's an article written over at bsdmag.org. And I'm sorry if I mispronounce your first name here, but Siju George. So George is the last name here. But he wrote an article talking about his reasons for using Dragonfly BSD in production. And pretty interesting, especially if you've never used Dragonfly before or curious about some of the reasons why people are picking it. But he ran through some different periods of running both FreeBSD and OpenBSD, but for different reasons that led him away from each. So specifically, he mentions issues doing port upgrades on FreeBSD that caused him some difficulty. And then on OpenBSD, the time required to do an FSCK or doing the RAID parity checks on Open. And he said during his research, though, he had heard about this Hammer file system and didn't know of anyone particularly running it in production. So he mentions in the article doing some mailing list conversations and then getting some pointers straight from the man himself, Matthew Dillon. So he decided to take the plunge and switch. But some of the positives here, he says he has fallen in love with the operating system now. And most of the key strengths he notes are the rolling release model, which he said means can be upgraded every few weeks or whenever he gets around to it. And of course, no time-consuming FSCK after an unclean shutdown. I can see how that would be helpful.
Well, yeah, especially as disks got bigger, that basically became not an option.
Yeah, for sure. And he said no RAID parity checks anymore, while still keeping the redundancy. And, of course, the ability to add volumes to Hammer on the fly is a big deal. But he also mentions looking forward to Hammer 2 and its potential for easy clustering support, along with an eventual CARP implementation so we can run 2 systems on the same IP. So he's got some new things he's looking forward to, too. I'm not sure. Do we have an ETA on the Hammer 2 yet?
I don't think so. But he also mentioned the interesting feature of Hammer is that the way the kind of equivalent to ZFS transaction groups work is basically you automatically keep snapshots from each flush every for the last so many minutes until you clean them up. So that means basically, even without actually taking the snapshots, you're getting basically backups of all the files every 5 minutes, and then those get flushed away as they get older. Which is really handy to be able to just kind of reach back and get a version of a file very quickly. Whereas, taking snapshots that frequently in ZFS could be a bit of a bog on the system.
Sure. So yeah, definitely an interesting article. Again, I'm also in similar boat. I haven't run into people running it in production, but this definitely makes a compelling case on why Dragonfly may be something you need to consider if you have some of the same needs that he did as well. But check out the article. It's well written. Again, it's on bsdmag.org, so easy enough to find. We'll have the link in the show notes. Okay, so what's this next one here, Alan? Something I saw made some rounds on social media this week.
So this is from phosphorus.com, and basically Larry Kafiro is talking about why he's decided to leave Linux and come to BSD, not for technical reasons like most people often do, but for reasons of the community and just the attitude in the Linux community.
Sure, the politics of it and stuff.
He says he understands, Linus Torvalds is a great and historic person or whatever and did a lot of good things, but at the same time, a clear majority of FOSS people think that it's okay to, let Linus be Linus and kind of have his bad attitude. And,
Sure.
Larry writes that, let Linus be, John Hall or Bob Young or,
Mm-hmm.
he probably doesn't know, but, if Linus was like Kirk McCusick instead, imagine how different the world would be.
That's right.
We had nice people running things, right?
I guess not everyone's as fortunate to have a Kirk.
Yes, exactly.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, the wider FOSS community are hamstrung to having great and historic figures continuously and consistently acting like foul-mouthed, petulant children. And so he's happier to have the more structured community. And I think the biggest thing is, like Kirk has talked about before, the real strength of an open source project is being able to survive a change of leadership. Whereas Linux has had the same leadership for its entire time, BSD has elections and evolves every 2 years. And that allows mostly to make sure that we don't have to put up with things like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool. Well, one of the interesting things that I got tagged in was that he ended up converting his main workstation over to PC-BSD. So that was the particular BSD he landed on.
Yep.
Which, of course, I was interested in hearing about that. But a couple of interesting quotes here. He said, according to Larry, within a couple hours of adding backup files and tweaking, and of course, augmented by a variety of look moments, which could easily make me the ADHD Foundation poster boy, it looks now exactly like my personally modified Carora 22 XFCE, which graced the machine earlier. He also gave a great compliment to the quality of the documentation and the application selection on PC-BSD. He says, in addition, you'd like to have an operating system which gives you a book, in this case, the PC-BSD handbook, which should be the gold standard of documentation. It's enviable, as in, man, I wish I had written that. Also, programs like App Cafe provide a plethora of free open source software, so there's no shortage of programs. Side by side, there's nothing on the Linux side of things that is lacking on the BSD side of things. So that's a great quote. Good to see that.
Yeah, well, the PC-BSD handbook is pretty amazing. Drew basically is like, there's the FreeBSD handbook, and then imagine it with more focus on desktop-y stuff and with screenshots.
That's right. That's right. Because a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yes.
Sometimes just you can refer to that.
And while the handbook maybe, I think it's over 150,000 words or something, it doesn't have enough pictures.
Right. But yeah, Drew deserves a lot of credit for that. She has kept that thing great, and I know Kurt Dox has helped out a lot in the team. So, and other documenters have come and gone as well who have helped. So it's really good to see that kind of praise for it. So I'm proud of that.
Yes. Other than the typical Linux people, most of the only comments is a bunch of people want Steam. It's like, well, yes, but
True.
True.
We would all like Steam, but
the Steam under Wine thing actually gives you more games than Steam under Linux does. So maybe
that is true. That is true.
Maybe
and
that's
we've
good
done
enough
that for quite a while, right?
Yep.
But anyway, regardless of his initial reason for the switch, hey, we're glad to have you. And any other switchers who want to join us on the BSD site are welcome to hop on over. Trust us, the water's warm. It's nice over here.
Yep.
Okay, so this came by our inbox this week as well. A new resource for doing some BSD schooling. It looks like teachbsd.org has been launched. So what exactly is this providing, Alan?
So actually, it's a GitHub repo with all of the source material to actually teach Robert Watson's master's course on operating system design and George Neville Neal's practitioner course, which is for people who are actually, software engineering in the field and want to learn how to use dtrace to actually, make changes to FreeBSD and see what happens. And also, or my application is not as fast as I want it to be on BSD. So use dtrace to find out why and make a change and see whether that actually helped or made it worse.
Interesting.
But basically, it's two different courses based on the design and implementation of FreeBSD operating system textbook, and also has links here to the 2014 and 2015 versions of the course at Cambridge and the dtrace course when it was taught at Asia BSDCon last year. But basically, on this GitHub repo, under a BSD documentation license, so the license is pretty much the same as the source code, except for slightly modified to be about documentation. It's everything you need to teach these courses, including the teaching guide. So there's a giant PDF for the professor to understand what's happening, get it all up to speed on it, so he can use this as to teach the course. But there's also like all the slides and stuff for the classes, all the labs, everything is in here.
This is some really fantastic stuff, and the fact that this is available under an open source license is pretty incredible.
Exactly.
I'd love to see other colleges, technical schools, etc., starting to pull on some of these resources.
Yeah. So if you pull up the master's course on GitHub, you can see there's copies of all the handouts for the class, the labs, and the lectures. And there's the teaching guide, so it has all the stuff that you would need to actually teach it. Yeah.
Hey, yes, build instructions for using latex.
Yes.
How nice is that? Or use the makefile.
The one thing they're working on is an automated process for converting the latex stuff into PowerPoint slides, because that's what some people use rather than PDFs and latex.
Okay.
Because sometimes if you're teaching at a certain school, they might just have Windows on the projector computer, not a Unix in which you can display latex files.
Sure.
And that's the other thing.
Well, you'd think PDFs would work there though too.
Yep.
Do that on most OSs.
Yeah. And then there's also all the stuff for the practitioner's course, and then all the figures and diagrams and all that stuff. And like I mentioned, the teaching guide to actually be able to teach it. And so this will be open. People can put pull requests to add more material or clear things up or whatever. Although it's quite polished at this point. They've already taught it twice at Cambridge. But it's going to just keep improving, and hopefully now it'll be available at more schools soon. So if you're a student at a school and you would like to be able to take this course at some point, you should start haranguing professors to look at it now. Because it'll probably, they're going to want to spend some time with that teaching guide and so on to get up to speed with it before they go trying to teach it.
Nice.
And the other thing is hopefully I will get some time and be able to add something. The practitioner stuff is aimed at programmers, but I'd also like to offer the material for a more
stuff.
Trade school / community college type course on actually just operating FreeBSD. Beyond just this is how you set up Nginx, because that's not really BSD specific, but a bunch of stuff.
Sure.
And it might also be nice just to have an entire course on ZFS.
I know Drew does ZFS training and stuff too. I wonder if we'll see things like that start to land in here as well.
Yeah. It could be a nice repo to have all the stuff in there, so that
that's nice.
BSDs will make it big in education again.
So of course we're going to try and get an interview lined up to talk more about this. I assume with George.
I talked to George, and yes, but he's trying to actually get it so we'd have Watson and him at the same time, which makes scheduling slightly harder, but be very much worth it.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay. Well, we will bring that to you in a future episode then, so you'll have to patiently await that. I know we will. Okay, so next up we have a few thoughts on the recently released OpenBSD 5.8. So we have an article here, user kind of detailing their thoughts, reactions, and some concerns after upgrading to 5.8 and some of the things that have changed.
Yeah, so they talk about first, so sudo's gone now. I can get it from ports, but this doas is supposed to be pretty good. So they switched to doas and find a couple of bugs with it, like the line continuation where you put the backslash at the end of a line so that you can continue it on the next line, was causing line numbers and error messages to point them at the wrong place, right? Because if you have a couple of those continued lines, when you have an error further down, it tells you the error is like 5 lines higher than it was. And then you're like, well, that line's perfectly fine. And a couple things like that. So that initially led them to have some concerns about doas, but they've adopted that now and are fairly happy with it. But then they mentioned the removal of TCP wrapper support from SSH, which I don't know if that was 5.8 or sooner, but they mentioned it in the article. Which, if you weren't expecting that or didn't read the release notes or whatever, that caused a bunch of rules in your host.allow file to no longer be applied, meaning that people that had previously been blocked are no longer blocked from accessing your SSH server, FTP, or whatever you were blocking with it. I know that Brian Drury revived or made a patch for the OpenSSH-portable on FreeBSD to re-add the TCP wrapper support because I don't know what his use case was, but for me, I have SSHD in a bunch of jails, and those jails don't have a firewall because I'm not using vimage. So the only way they can block stuff is with TCP wrappers and something like deny host. Now, I could do something where, on the host, I examine the log files from each jail and block it in the firewall there, but it was easier to have these self-contained because one of the things I like about the jails is I can pick it up and move it to a different machine, and if they're not all set up to do this, then it can cause me headaches, right?
Sure. That makes sense. Yeah, I've had to do that one for the host peeking in, and that's a lot.
Yeah, I ended up having to do that one for Asterix because it didn't have TCP wrapper support, and so I had to actually use IPFW to block stuff. Anyway, so the other one that was big for him was in OpenBSD previously in rc.conf there was a pf_rules variable that basically pointed to where you want to keep your pf rules, which file they're in. And so he used to keep the default pf.conf, and then so that that would get overwritten at each upgrade, and he would keep his rules in pf.conf.local and then point to that with pf rules variable. But they apparently removed that. So the effect is that for the period after the upgrade until I noticed the change, my system would, using the default rules that are a lot more open, or worse, could be a lot more closed, and then you can't use anything. And that would basically, the firewall didn't end up doing what he thought it was going to do.
Sure.
Yeah, and so, as I've looked at changing things in FreeBSD, I keep running into this thing that they call the POLA violation, or policy of least astonishment. And,
I always wondered what that stood
policy
for.
of least astonishment. It's when deciding what the system should do after you make some change or, some new features introduced. The general idea is that it should be the thing that will be the least surprising to the user, right? The user shouldn't be like, it's doing what now? It's like, my firewall rules just don't apply anymore? That's surprising. And so the general idea is that it should do what the user expected it to do. And then, if they want it to do something different, then they should have to tell it. We don't want it to just suddenly start blocking all traffic or suddenly allowing all traffic, because that's generally not what you want it to do.
Okay. Looks like he saw something as well with a key file. He said a minor annoying change was made in 5.8 was putting the file var unbound.db root.key into Etsy change list, so that file gets checked daily by the security script. He said the issue with this is if you're actually using unbound with DNSSEC, this file changes daily, though only in the comments. So yeah, I can see how that would be annoying. A lot of false positives there. He said, also we want to mention it would be kind of neat to see a list of feedback like this after other releases of all the BSDs, so that next releases can be better. So if you run into these on any other BSDs or run into problems like this, be sure to post your findings somewhere so we can read them off here, pass them along, and hopefully a developer out there will hear that and then get to take care of that for a next release.
Yeah, so I'd definitely like to see more of those.
Yeah, what changed or what didn't change.
Yes, because I think
surprising ways that things
most
change.
recently there was one for somebody complaining about a problem with the installer in FreeBSD 9.3. It's like, well, I've released 2 newer versions of it since then. It's like, right, 9.3. You shouldn't be installing new 9.3s anymore. That's what. And then they're like, well, can we get this fixed so we can have it in 9.4? I'm like, there's not going to be a 9.4. 9's over. Hell, 10's almost over. The last release of 10 is coming up in a couple of months here, and then it'll be time for 11. Actually, we might have a 10.4, I think, because 10.3 is coming out, and then 11.0, and we definitely want one more 10 before we go all over to 11.
Great. Okay, well, we have been teasing you about the awesome interview we're going to have with Brian Cantrill, so wait up for that. It's going to be coming in just a moment. But before we get to that, of course, we're going to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean. And, of course, DigitalOcean.com is the website you go to. So go there. You can create a free account, put some money in it, or better yet, you can use the coupon code FREEBSDNow to throw an extra $10 in your account, which allows you to host droplets or VMs, basically, in their cloud-based infrastructure, which is really cool because they let you do FreeBSD natively. You can throw OpenBSD in there as well. There's instructions for that. And, if you have to, you can use Linux. But DigitalOcean makes it super simple. It's like less than 60 seconds to spin up a FreeBSD VM in whatever data center you pick. And they just have a nice, handy little list of all the different locations.
Yes, I was just noticing they haven't updated their little graphic. They updated the text beside it, but the little graphic doesn't show all the new locations. On top of New York and San Francisco, they recently added Toronto in Canada, and then they also have London and Amsterdam, and recently Frankfurt in Germany, and then for Asia they have Singapore.
Yeah, so definitely a variety of locations to choose from, so you can get something really close to you if you need low pings and whatnot, or get something far away. Maybe you want to send something far away for a backup or whatever. But it's really neat to see that availability. And of course, they have the tools so you can test your bandwidth to each connection and run all the ping tests and stuff right there on the website, which makes it pretty convenient. Yes. But spinning up your VMs is simple. Like I said, it's like paste your SSH key in and pick what you want to install.
Yeah. They also have IPv6 support now in, I think, all the locations. Yes, it's standard at all the locations now. And also... now that they finally have the elastic IP feature, or dynamic IP, or movable, I forget what they call it, but basically means that you can do something similar to CARP between two. You can have a physical, your regular public IP address, and pick it up off one VM and move it to a different one, so that you can do failover. But also, if you want to say you're upgrading the website, the version of WordPress or whatever framework you use for your website, you could take a snapshot of your VM, clone that and spin it up, upgrade the software, then move the IP to the new one, and if it all works, then fine, you get rid of the old one. If it doesn't, you can just move the IP back, your site's back to how it was, everything's fine, and you can fix this or start over from a fresh snapshot and do the upgrade again and get it right, and then move it again, and it worked, and then you can throw away the old one.
Yeah, that's just super convenient. It's nice that they have all those tools, and their documentation is pretty awesome too on teaching you how to do these different things. So, matter of fact, if you're Googling how to do different things on FreeBSD or pretty much anything, you may run across a DigitalOcean article in your searches. So they definitely do a good work at keeping you up to date on all the latest best practices for these kind of tasks. But again, guys, DigitalOcean.com, go there, and if you talk to them, tell them you heard about it here on BSD Now.
We're joined again this week by Brian Cantrill, who's CTO over at Joyent. So first of all, welcome back to the show.
Great, thanks for having me. Fun to be back.
Yeah, your last interview was epic, and I think our most highly raved about episode ever. So hopefully we can build on top of that.
Yeah, the only thing I regret is at one point I got very animated in a story, and I flipped off the camera. I wasn't flipping you off, but I was kind of using the bird as kind of a rhetorical device.
It's a double version of it?
Yeah, there may have been a double version of that. And unfortunately, my kids are now at the age where they actually consume all this stuff on the internet. And so my kids watched it, and I have now lost all kind of moral high ground around the house. And now they're like, they've gone around flipping everything off. So I really got to watch myself. It's dangerous. Anyway, it was great. I had a lot of fun.
That turned into an animated GIF meme as well.
It did, apparently. I know. Yeah, it's dangerous. Yeah.
And then there was you face palming was very good. Another animated GIF that got out there.
Actually, I actually am kind of worried about developing a closed head injury and having CTE in my forebrain from having constantly facepalm myself. I'm worried that I'll be talking to a neurologist in 20 years being like, are you sure you never played a contact sport? Like, I've facepalmed myself a lot at high velocity. So yeah, that I need to maybe wear a helmet. Maybe that's what I need to start doing. Is wear a helmet.
So I thought we'd start off the interview with maybe a slightly lighter question than usual. But so which piece of code have you been working on most recently?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, it's a great question because the thing I did actually my most recent push actually was the rare improvement of the system solely by removing code. We actually had actually a pretty interesting issue. So to give you the backstory here, when we are low on memory in the system in SmartOS, one of the things that we look for are fragmented memory caches. And in particular, the dnode cache can get really fragmented. So you recall from ZFS, we have a dnode T. And if we have a slab-based allocator in the system, in fact, the original slab-based allocator done by Bonwick, and if you have a slab that has kind of a single object allocated out of the middle of it, that memory can't be reused elsewhere in the system. And one of the things we observed many years ago is that the system gets low on memory and it's fragmented at the slab layer. And what you'd like to be able to go do is go relocate and kind of reclaim some of these dnodes. So this is a problem we observed probably 6 or 7 years ago, and maybe 4 or 5 years ago, added the ability to the system to, when it's low on memory, to go move these things. But when you're developing things that are going to act when the system is low on memory, you really need to be very careful about how that's done, because it's very easy to generate really deleterious effects. And one of the things that this thing had done is, if it can't find, I'm sorry, this is a much longer answer than you probably wanted, but when it goes to ask the dnode cache. KMEM says, okay, we're low on memory. So it asks the dnode cache, hey, can you actually free some stuff up? Tell me about this buffer. Tell me about this buffer. And it's asking the dnode cache about buffers. And the dnode cache is saying, yes, you can actually move this. That is, say, you can copy this object somewhere else. Or no, you can't move this. Or I don't know. And I don't know means, gosh, I think I freed this, but I actually don't know. Like, this may be freed and sitting in what's called the magazine layer. So one of the things that was added to KMEM to allow it to scale, and a work that was done beyond the original slab paper, but was outlined in the 2001 slab paper, KMEM paper, is the ability to have what's called a per CPU magazine. And a magazine, just like the munition term that inspired it, Bonwick's a bit of a libertarian, bit of a goofball in that regard. The magazine holds rounds, and those rounds are actual buffers. So when you free on a CPU, you're kind of freeing into your little magazine. And then when the magazine gets full, there's a queue of full magazines. And if you need to allocate, you're going to allocate out of the full magazine. And all those are kept per CPU. If you get too many magazines per CPU, those go into a global layer, and you get this global layer of full magazines. And this becomes important because what this code used to do, the KMEM move code, it would talk to the dnode cache, ask, do you know about this buffer? Dnode cache says, I don't know. And then the code says, okay, I'm going to hunt the magazines. And it literally had the verb hunt in the function name, and which I almost want to, like, you should never have something in the kernel that's called hunt. We do not go hunting in the kernel. We don't search in the kernel. We need to be very careful about, if we're hunting, that's the wrong verb to have in the OS kernel. So it hunts through the magazines, and it needs to go through all of the magazines on the per CPU basis, which is kind of bad enough because it has to grab per CPU locks. But then it has to go through any full magazines at the depot layer. And the problem is that because we are tight on memory, we've already asked this thing to liberate any memory that it's not actually using. So we have all these full magazines at the depot layer, to the point of, like, we had like 3.1 million buffers in this one of the dumps we looked at. So for every buffer that it wants to relocate, it iterates over it hunts over 3.1 million buffers. So this is like order of n squared doesn't even capture it. And because this is happening at a time when the system is low on memory, you end up with, like, system is fine, system is fine, system is fine, system is terrible, and we have no idea what's going on. And because you're doing this with locks held, it's really hard. I mean, if you've had these problems, it can be really hard to figure out what's going on, because all your stat tools, your ability to create processes, your ability to instrument the system, everything stops. And then all of a sudden, it writes itself again, maybe minutes later, and you've got no idea what's going on. And we were using dtrace enabling and so on, and we were only seeing this in production, of course, couldn't reproduce this in development. I mean, that's, as always, of course, I don't even bother asking anymore. And finally, we got a dump from this thing, and we were able to iterate on this and figure out what was going on. and found like, oh my God, this thing is iterating. I mean, over 3.1 million buffers. It's got a lock held. Something else is blocked on that lock. Something is blocked on that. Something is blocked on that. Something is blocked on that. The thing that's blocked on that is the stat tool trying to give us the information. And so we're like, you know what? This whole idea is busted. Like, we should not be hunting magazines, in particular because if the dnode cache doesn't know, first of all, it's very likely that it is free, it's in a full magazine, and it's going to be given back to the system soon anyway. So we can just delete all this logic. This logic never should have existed. It was a terrible idea. I mean, that's a bit strong, but it was not – the emergent behavior was not well thought out in terms of why is this code being called? This code's being called because you're low on memory. If you're low on memory, you don't need to hunt into magazines to defrag a slab because you're under memory pressure. Like all those, any memory that's in a magazine that's been freed, that is going to asymptotically approach being freed because we're under memory pressure. Anyway, so I was able to just delete code, which is great. It's like the diff is just minus. I wanted to make it just deletion, but there were comments that had really embedded this notion in it. So I had to modify some comments and add some comments explaining why we don't do this. But I didn't have to change I didn't have to add a single instruction, which felt great. You know, it feels terrific when you do that. You know, it feels like you're removing like a cyst or something. I mean, this is like if you've ever had if you've ever kind of needed something surgically removed that is literally adding zero value. Surgeons love to remove that stuff because it's just like, oh, it's so delicious. You go in, I'm a surgeon, I get to cut you open. I love to cut things. That's why I'm a surgeon. I'm a borderline sadist. I get to cut you open. I get to remove. I get something called lipomas, and I had a giant lipoma, and I still get lipomas kind of in various places. I had a big one on my arm that was kind of, this is way too much information, as my kids would say, but that had turned into kind of the size of a golf ball and was beginning to really disturb people. So I'm like, all right, I got to get this thing removed. And that's what the KMM Hunt magazines was like, the lipoma on the arm. And man, my surgeon loved removing it. He had so much fun removing that lipoma. And my father's a physician. Whenever he would look at it, he would feel it, and you could see in his eyes, like, I want to cut you open right now. I want to remove this thing now. It's like, oh, it's like this visceral. These people are, anyway. I get squeamish around actual bodies, but I do understand the visceral appeal because I love to surgically remove code. So anyway, I got to surgically remove a cyst, which was this Hunt magazine logic. It should probably have a collection of verbs that we should just go searching for in the kernel, and just like, wait a minute, why do we have Hunt should never appear in a function name? So anyway, that was that, which was fun. Got to put that back earlier this week.
Awesome. That's a great story. See, this is why we ask you questions like this.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to find, you know? So and that's been a nasty issue for us. I mean, that is actually it's been a really serious issue that is, you know, we run ZFS in production in this production-facing service. And this is the kind of issue that you only discover after years and, you know, really pounding on the system. So it was fun to actually get that thing removed.
Yeah, I've actually run into something kind of similar in FreeBSD with the networking stack, with the specific driver for the network card we have. Our server is in a fairly unusual situation where it actually sends jumbo frames to the internet. So it wants to allocate 9K chunks of memory at a time.
Does that work? How does the internet appreciate that? I mean,
Our transit provider carries it across their entire network as 9K and fragments it at their edge when they drop it to somebody who doesn't have 9K.
You know that transit provider is like, oh, brother, it's the jumbo guys again.
They offered when I got hooked up, and I was like, sure, that sounds like a good plan to me.
Oh, they offered. Yeah. All right. Well, then they only have themselves to blame.
Exactly. But, you know, you're trying to allocate these 9K, but pages are 4K. And so there's a little bit of, and it's like, how do I get 9K of contiguous memory after the machine's been up for a year?
Right. Where the hell is that stupid number from, by the way? The 9K. Also, like, jumbo? Like, that is not it feels like what we call a jumbo mortgage in the Bay Area. A jumbo mortgage in the Bay Area doesn't buy you a driveway in Fremont. I mean, the jumbo frame being 9,000 bytes, where the hell is that number from?
Yeah, because
9,000.
It's not big enough to be jumbo, right? It's like, ooh, 6 times the regular size.
Right, and it's not even like a power of 2, is it? It feels like, oh, it's 8192 plus some. That's what it feels like. It feels like it. I don't know. Be interesting to know. I'm sure the history there is sorted.
Yeah. So before we get into talking about Linux interfaces and that whole thing, could you tell us a little bit about why you have to care about them? Or, you work on SmartOS, which is Lumos based.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't I have
Linux?
Right, exactly. Right. You have clean water. Why do you care about waterborne illness? It's like, well, I normally wouldn't have to. That's why I have clean water. Yeah, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess depending on your perspective. So we implemented, starting some number of years ago, a Linux personality, a Linux system call table on top of SmartOS, LX branded zones, and it allows you to. It actually works incredibly well, in part because of the FreeBSD and SmartOS share a kind of definition of what the operating system is. Linux does not actually share that definition. And one of the starkest points of contrast between the BSDs and the Lumos and so on and Linux is what the operating system is. And for Linux, the operating system is only the OS kernel. It is not beyond the OS kernel. Whereas for you and for us, the operating system is the whole thing. Right. So, for you and for us, LS is part of the operating system. Whereas for Linux, LS is just a program that you happen to run and that you get that from a distro. And this is why you get to kind of the legitimate, old flame fests between GNU Linux and Linux, because so much of what people think of as Linux is actually that GNU stack. I mean, glibc is just one libc that you can run. And, I disagree with that. There are a lot of ramifications of that distinction. I think many of them are negative for the user. There's one positive distinction from my perspective, selfish perspective, and that is that because Linux is just the kernel, if you implement that kernel interface in a totally convincing airtight fashion, if you have a Linux system call table that effectively has all of the behavior and side effects and so on of the Linux system call table, Upstack apps will just run. Everything just runs once you have the system call table in place and working perfectly. That wouldn't actually be true if you tried to go implement a SmartOS personality on Linux. Would be much more complicated because of the fact that barrier is considered to be much more porous, whereas it's not porous at all. It's very rigid, and they are very, very rigid about ABI compatibility across, which is great for me. It's kind of surprising, because I felt like for many years Linux would just kind of break things, where FreeBSD and Lumos and SmartOS have always, we believe in not breaking user apps. But, Torvalds kind of discovered religion late in life on this one. And frankly, like a lot of people that discover religion late in life, he's an evangelical. I mean, the guy's nuts. I mean, he's insane on ABI compatibility. They will break. It doesn't matter how broken the ABI is. They will not fix it if it's going to break any app. And that ABI for them is not at the library interface the way it is for FreeBSD and it is for us. That ABI is the system call layer. So if you can get that system call layer working, everything Upstack works. So that's what we endeavored to do. And actually, this was done originally at Sun back in the day, but was mothballed because it was thought that Linux was moving too fast. This is before Torvalds discovered religion. And then we resurrected it about a year and a half ago. I should say we. It's actually a member of the community resurrected it and resurrected it, got it working, and was using Skype. Using the Linux Skype binary on an LX branded zone on SmartOS, and sent out mail to the discussion list being like, hey, this seems to work. There's some limitations, but this seems to work well enough. I think this might be of interest. It's like, yes, that is of interest. Thank you, open source community. I mean, you never know. Yep. It's the great thing about open source. You never know when someone is going to come along and do something that you never would have done, right? So that was great, and we resurrected it. That was in early 2014, and spent all of 2014 and a lot of 2015 taking that to its logical completion. And that, which has been great, that has meant I have taken the deepest possible whiffs of dirty Linux underwear. I cannot tell you, and I'm sorry, no other metaphor will do. I mean, that is the only metaphor that captures it. I mean, I know everything that everyone ate for dinner. I mean, it is it's really pretty ugly. So we've had to go into, and on the one hand, I kind of hoped that that the stereotypes I have of Linux would not hold true. Unfortunately, I came out with the conclusion that they hold much truer than I thought they did. So that's a little bit of a tragedy. And I think we were talking about EPOL last time. Unfortunately, EPOL is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it is really kind of far and wide, just semantically a mess, unfortunately. And some of this, the stuff that kills you. I mean, some of the stuff. I mean, whatever. You try to be forgiving because we all make API mistakes, right? When you develop an API, it's really easy, especially if you're not using that API yourself. If you're not developing the consumer of that API, it's really easy to have something that's totally unusable. And and they've had plenty of examples of that. Some things that are just like actually so unusable. Actually, the really comic stuff is the stuff that's so unusable that even Linux has abandoned it. I mean, the slums that are so filthy that even Linux won't live there. Those are amazing. So things like denotify. So denotify, which you probably don't know about denotify. You'd be forgiven for not knowing about denotify. Denotify stands for directory notify. This is the way to get events on a directory and this is KQ has got the vnode. You've got vnode-based KQ events in BSD for event ports. We've got file-based events. So this this kind of makes sense. But the way denotify was implemented was just comically bad in that, among other things, the way you would indicate this was via the functal interface. You're kind of like, okay, what does that smell? So you do this via functal, which is a little bit goofy. The way you would get notification that something has happened to the directory that you're interested in is via SIG.io. And you're just like, okay, get the helmet on, poof! Like, what do you know? Not signals. Seriously? And this is like where someone just like saw the word signal. It's like, oh, I want to signal a process, so I'll use a signal. That must be the right thing. It's like, no, please just stop for a second. Please. Just stop for a second and try to understand what you're doing. And signals are a totally regrettable mistake in so many ways. You definitely don't want to use signals to convey meaningful information. Please. But so they did SIG.io, and the SIG action would have some modicum of information, but not nearly enough to actually figure out what the hell happened. So denotify was actually considered to be so bad that they needed a replacement, which is, again, we actually haven't had to implement denotify, thank God, because no apps use it. And so they replaced denotify with this thing called iNotify. The I standing for inode, still a bit dubious. And iNotify was designed to deal with all of denotify's problems. So one of the problems that they had with denotify was that you could only get notification on an FD that you actually had open, which I think and the problem being that you can't unmount a file system that someone has a denotify on. This is the kind of thing where I think actually from the SmartOS perspective, Lumos perspective, and probably from the FreeBSD perspective, I'm like, I don't know that that's a bug. If somebody is asking for notification on a directory and has the FD, I mean, the fact that they have the FD open, maybe that should prevent an unmount. Yeah. Or, so I think that, you know what I mean? I think it's like you're in kind of there's an interesting semantic discussion to be had there, but no discussion was had. It's like, no, that's bad. We don't want to have that. We don't want to force you to have a file open, an FD open, to be able to get notification on it. So they did iNotify, which is strictly path-based. And it is almost plausible. So with iNotify, you can have events on a directory, for example, and one of the events of the directory is, hey, a file has been created under this directory. And now that said, you have an event queue in the kernel. That event queue is of bounded size. It can overflow. There are lots of things that you need to go deal with, things that KQ doesn't quite have, event-ports doesn't quite have. But so it's a bit dubious, and so you're kind of implementing iNotify, or I was implementing iNotify, and I was like, you know what, this is almost kind of useful. This isn't so bad, actually. I'm kind of impressed. I was actually kind of secretly proud of Linux that they had done, yes, they had done the wrong thing in denotify, but they were actually trying to do the better thing, which is good. That's a sign of some development of frontal lobe. That's good. I thought this was good. And we're going to deal with the hard link issue. It's like, okay, deal with the hard link issue. Well, they didn't really deal with the hard link issue much at all, because hard links do create a problem, right? And iNotify, this is really, really weird. iNotify, so you do iNotify of a particular path. One of the challenges is if you do iNotify of a directory, you will not just get creation events of files in that directory, which modify that directory. You can then get modifications of files that are in that directory. And that's weird, right? Because when you open a file in a directory, that's an action on that directory. I kind of have that directory. I know this file is in the directory you're interested in. But once that file is open, it can be unlinked, right? So what does it mean for a file to be modified in a directory. Files aren't modified in directories. Files are just modified. Open files are modified. They don't need to be in a directory, right? They were in a directory when they were opened. They're not necessarily now. And by the way, they could be in one directory or multiple directories because you can have a hard link to this file. And the super goofy thing that they did, and I don't know, this is one of those things where it's like, does someone actually think this is a good idea, or is this just an accident of the implementation? That if you've got two hard links to a file, and you've expressed interest in the directory /var/temp/foo, and we've created var temp foo bar. Okay, and now we've modified var temp foo bar. You're getting events. Var temp foo bar is being notified. Great. I now create a hard link to var temp foo bar over in var temp baz. So I've got a hard link var temp baz bar that is a hard link to var temp foo bar. If I modify the file through var temp foo bar, you get notification. If I modify it through the other hard link, you don't get notification. It's like you're inventing semantics that don't exist. You know what I mean? It's like
they need to decide, is iNotify based on paths, in which case it should be called pNotify, or is it based on the inode number, which is the same if they're a hard link?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And the thing is, on the one hand, again, this is a bit of an inside baseball thing. It's a bit unfair. iNotify is a huge improvement over dnotify for sure. My God, it doesn't use signals for crying out loud. So it's a huge improvement. But no, you're exactly right. And you know what's funny? Because this is actually a huge issue, I think, for our communities. And that's something that I don't think the Linux community really gets. Nomenclature matters. You know, it's really important to us to figure out what names mean, because that name will be used by future generations to understand what it does, to extend what it does, to know what they're doing is appropriate or not. And names really matter. So you're right. I mean, it should be, if it's going to be path notification, it should be pNotify. And by the way, if it's path notification, that forces you to think about problems that they didn't really consider. You know, if it's inode notification, you shouldn't have this crazy ass goofy behavior. You know what I mean?
It doesn't matter if it's in a directory. It's just an index in the file system. It can be anywhere, and anything can happen to it.
And they do this all the time. It's like, all right, so I'm sorry, we're going off on a rant. Like, strap on, like, you've done it. Like, we're going to escape to, we're going to achieve exit velocity. We're aiming, next stop, Urt Cloud of Rage, because we're getting out of here. So, okay, so I'm using one of the things about doing this Linux system table is I'm constantly, like, trying out all this crap in Linux. I'm constantly on the bleeding edge of garbage in Linux. And so, you know, we're using CentOS 7 or whatever, and I'm trying to use Yum. It's like, oh, Yum doesn't exist anymore. Instead, it's DNF. You heard of this?
Nope.
DNF? DNF. Okay.
That's did not finish.
Yes.
That's what happens when you crash and burn in a race.
Yes. Thank you. DNF is did not finish. If you have ever come on, like, haven't you guys ever jogged a block in your life? If you've ever run a 5K, DNF is did not finish. And you had the exact same question I had. It's like, DNF, what does that stand for other than did not finish? Of course, you Google it, and it's like, DNF is did not finish. Like, okay, so what does DNF, please, what does DNF stand for other than did not finish? And you're trying to figure out what it stands for. And finally, you get the email from the creator of DNF, who's like, why do people keep asking me about this? DNF doesn't stand for anything, okay? It's just something that occurred to me. It's just like, oh my God. You know, do you wonder why people keep asking you this? Because nomenclature matters. They're trying to figure out what the hell you're trying to do with DNF. And, you know, they come up with some retro namer about just a fancifier of some, I mean, some terrible retro name, backronym or whatever. Which is, yeah, you know, it's like, oh my God. And so they do this over and over again. I mean, and okay, like, you know, if you're playing your systemd drinking game, definitely I'll go ahead and take a drink because I'm going to say systemd. Systemd. What the hell is that? Like, it's the system daemon? That doesn't mean anything. It's like, why not call it thingd? Or, you know, it's like this. And the whole thing is the system. So, like, what do you mean the system daemon? That, like, what boundary where does systemd stop? You know, what do you say, oh, this component, it doesn't belong in systemd? Because if it's in the system, by the way, the manifest destiny of systemd is to consume all software. I can understand why people get fidgety around it. You know what I mean? And then it's even worse. I don't know. Did you see this? They did this SD event, VenSD, I think. This ePoll. I just saw this over Hacker News over the weekend. So it is an ePoll event library that systemd uses, and it's actually on the one hand like very gratifying because you read all of their complaints about ePoll, and you're like, oh my god, it's not just me, because all their complaints about ePoll, all the complaints I have of ePoll, and they're complaining about how it's not usable, and you've got to make this layer of software on top of it. It's like, okay, great. So they did this thing that actually looks somewhat reasonable, but it's welded into systemd. And I'm thinking from my selfish perspective, boy, I would love to use this library that does what ePoll should do as a library, run its test suite against our stuff, and just make sure that there are no edge conditions, right? Make sure that we're always looking to test our software and make sure that it works. So I'm thinking, oh, just take this library and test suite. I'm like, wait a minute, there is no library for this thing. Why? Because it's in libsystemd. It's like, what? If there is a name worse than systemd, it's libsystemd. I mean, first of all, if you ever have like lib my daemon name, you're doing it wrong. I mean, honestly, stop. You're doing it wrong. That is, you don't understand what a library means. You know what I mean? It's like it shouldn't be lib name of my command. That doesn't make sense. What are you trying to do? And it's like, boy, if they had only made a separate library for this thing, which would be a totally reasonable thing to have done.
If you want somebody to be able to use this somewhere else.
And have you seen Pottering's? I mean, God, I hate to go here, but Pottering's screed on other systems and how people need to just stop using other systems. I mean, it's actually terrifying, I have to say. I mean, it's like, this is why there is so much resistance. The idea, because there is a kind of idea that actually, no, you should not actually be deploying on a different system. My system is the only system. And especially for a system that is so misguided in so many fundamental ways, and if nothing else, has a totally profound desktop bias. Isn't that ridiculous, by the way, that systemd comes out of the desktop side? I mean, it's like, what? I mean, Linux is not a desktop operating system. I mean, I hate to kind of break this news, but like, why is anybody in the Linux community having terms dictated to them by the desktop? It's like, what? Are you people out of your mind? I mean, it's like, if I want to not be able to attach to my local Wi-Fi, I'll run Linux on my desktop. Other than that, it's like, sorry, the Mac is Unix on the desktop. I'm sorry. Obviously, other people do other things, and I honor other people doing other things on their desktop. But that ultimately, these are server-side operating systems. I mean, certainly the sweet spot for FreeBSD, the sweet spot for SmartOS Illumos, and the sweet spot for Linux are all on the server side. Why are you letting this kind of insane desktop demographic hijack the future of the operating system? I just don't even get it. Where were we? I'm sorry. Where do you even start? I know, this is, I just kind of like, I feel like I kind of like come to in the gutter being like, God, what state am I in? I remember like basically DNF and then blacking out. Anyway.
So actually, yeah. So what we were going to ask you was, one second here, fixing audio. Which library do you have? Do you want to complain about?
Oh God, yeah, God, where to start?
But just to circle back to the previous point you had about nomenclature. The one that gets me is KVM, it's kernel virtual machine or whatever. It's like, sorry, all of my servers already have a KVM.
Have a KVM
for the keyboard and the video and the mouse.
Keyboard, a video, and a mouse. I mean, come on, and like. Kernel virtual machine doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense. What is a kernel virtual machine? It's like, why not kernel virtual machine OS CPU? Why not call it a CPU DRAM NIC? It's like, they're like, let's just mash a bunch of things together. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. No, I'm totally with you. And KVM is one of those things where I've just like gotten past my anger, but I know it's important to kind of resurrect that because it's like, this nomenclature really, really, really matters, and because it reflects the craftsmanship and the intent, and we take this stuff very seriously, and that's why I think actually it's really important. One of the things I never feel that it's a waste of time or energy to discuss nomenclature up front. And it's not a point of minutia. And I really try to get let's get the thesaurus open. Let's really try to think about what it is we're trying to convey. And more often than not, when there's a disagreement about nomenclature, there's a third choice that hasn't been considered that everyone is kind of thinking of, but no one has kind of latched onto it yet. And then when that choice is proposed, it's like, yes, That's what I meant. Exactly. And then that nomenclature helps. I mean, it's the cornerstone of software is the nomenclature. And if you lay that cornerstone, upended and throw it into the street, it's like, well, that's why you have a slum, because this is why you can't build skyscrapers, because your cornerstones are in the street.
Yeah, it's kind of, chemistry. There's all these rules, and then you can take anything and describe it, and it makes sense, and everyone will know what you're talking about.
Exactly. It's amazing. You'll find it just amazing. It's very liberating when things actually make sense. And you also have this moment of like, when things don't make sense, everybody has to have the same, like, I am not understanding this correctly. Like, I don't get why. Okay, this is me. And you have that same kind of like self-doubting, like, I don't understand this. And this is the problem of it, things not making sense. It's like you are imposing a burden on people that actually do understand things because they begin to doubt themselves. We used to have the Solaris installer used to ask this terrible question. You go to install the operating system, and it would ask you this question: are you on a subnet? Yes or no? And I thought I knew what a subnet is, but I must not, because why is it asking me if I'm on one? It's like, I know I'm on the internet backbone. No, yeah, I'm like, yes,
is it
think I'm on a
possible
subnet,
to not be on a subnet? What does it mean to not be on a subnet?
I don't even know how.
Do you have an IPX network? Is that what that means?
And I'm sure there are an entire generation of technologists that, like, they didn't waste their lives over it, but I'm sure everyone wasted, like, it's a good, like, 10 minutes of, and this is before Wikipedia. You can't just, like, Google it. You got to be like, okay, I need to go get someone else. I need to go seek help because this thing is actually, I don't understand what's going on. And then you realize it's like, no, this thing's just stupid, actually. It's a dumb question. It shouldn't be asking you this. And then the rage. Then the rage comes. I think we finally got rid of that question, but it's such a moronic. Anyway, so when you do these things and you just throw out these things that have no meaning or have the wrong meaning, you end up creating this huge amount of confusion from actually well-intentioned, bright people who would understand the system and would actually help you, but instead they're enraged because you've named your thing the wrong thing. I mean, let alone how it's implemented.
Right. So as we get started this week, half hour in at this point.
Sorry, yeah, right, exactly. Are we ready to get started?
Yes.
Are we on yet?
You wanted to talk about Linux interfaces. So which specific ones are really high on your annoyed with list, I guess?
So I think, the ones where to me it rises above manslaughter and actually becomes murder one are where you actually have people years ago saying this is the wrong thing to do. And you don't actually, and the one that just kills me is mab don't need. So recall there's an madvise system call, and madvise allows you to give advice to the system about how memory will be used. And there's a mab don't need that you can say. And if you look at what does POSIX say, I should bring up what POSIX says on mab don't need. But POSIX will tell you that I don't think I'm going to be using this in the near future. Like, I'm not going to be I'm not going to use this. And what FreeBSD does, I think you guys have mab don't need, don't you? Do you know if you with that?
I think we do, yes.
Yeah. So what FreeBSD does, I would assume, I'm almost certain, and was certainly what we did, what basically every operating system did, is when you say map don't need, it's like, okay, so if I actually need to make available some physical memory, if I need to page anything out, this is first on the list. I'm going to page this out. Now, note, I'm just going to page it out. I'm not destroying its mapping. I'm just paging it out. It's going out to the swap device. And if you need it back, you might incur a page fault, but then, your data will still be there. Well, Linux got this one totally confused with another construct called mab free. And FreeBSD has got mab free. We've got mab free. I don't know what I think the origins are in kind of the mid 90s, maybe even earlier. Mab free says, I'm actually done with this. I'm not going to use this anymore. But what I want you to do is, if you need memory for someone else, give them this page, but don't page it out. It doesn't need to go to the backing store because it's just trash as far as I'm concerned. So I know if I touch this again, there'll be one of two things. It will either have what it's got on it now, whatever crap I don't want, or it will be zero filled because someone wanted that memory in the meantime. Okay? And makes total sense. So that's mab free, and that's mab don't need. Well, they totally screwed this up. And what mab don't need does is it says, actually, I'm going to rip down this mapping, and the page is now gone. And if you touch the page again, you will get zeros, guaranteed, on mab don't need. Which is like, what are you doing? No, this is advice. Like this is and again, it's a nomenclature thing. It's like mab free. Like that's a verb, right? Mab free is, it says that's a verb that says I expect that I'm kind of I'm pushing the bounds of advice, and I'm saying that you can free this if you want to, but it's advice, you don't have to do it. Mab don't need is literally saying I want you to purge this now. And if I touch it again, it's guaranteed zeros. Which is terrible. I mean, it's terrible. Like, why would anyone want this construct? And it's a dangerous construct to have. It's a dangerous construct to have because then you can become dependent on it. And people look at this like, oh, M-advise, mab don't need. Like, that must be fast. Like, if I want a free memory, I bet that's a fast way of doing it. Of course, they don't bother to measure it because it's not fast at all, because you're having a conversation with the VM system about actually purging this from the system versus mab free, which actually is fast. I bet this is fast. I'll use this to free something, and then I will implicitly rely on the fact that the B0 has been done for me if I touch it again. And unfortunately, Gemalloc, which I think of Gemalloc, I think of the girl band from the 80s, the cartoon girl band from the 80s, but this is what I'm totally dated. But Gemalloc, which is this this memory allocator that crash landed courtesy of Facebook, Gemalloc relies on this functionality. It relies on the fact that mab don't need is actually going to zero the memory. And as you can imagine, the consequences of not B0ing, of implicitly taking away a B0 on a reallocation, turns out like the manifestations of that are pretty subtle. And so we had applications that were just dying in really peculiar ways because, of course, you're dying way up stack in an application that was actually relying on the fact that this was B0'd, and now it's no longer B0'd because the system hasn't B0'd it because we were implementing mab don't need the way you should implement mab don't need, which is to say purely as advice. And by the way, we never actually got rid of this page and you got your old page back. So it got back junk, and then that junk was dereferenced, and then you're dying in like way up stack in really weird ways, and then you have no frame pointers because they don't say frame pointers because that's too slow, and then you're trying not to be like, okay, I actually need to go take my medication before I actually start punching my laptop because I can't even get a stack trace where we are. It's really bad. And so we finally figured that out. The reason this one felt so grievous is because you go back to these conversations. Like, on this one, you're like, seriously, who's to blame for this? This is really, really bad. This semantics are totally different from every other Unix. This feels so willful. Like, who did this? Who pulled the trigger on this? And you can find conversations from as early as the late 90s of people saying, oh, by the way, Linux did this wrong. Like, someone needs to fix this. Someone needs to fix this. Someone needs to fix this. Oh, this is broken. Like, and you get all sorts of people saying, I loved at one time, this is like in 2003, someone called it a crime against common sense. It's like, it totally is a crime against someone gets it. I'm glad someone else is contemplating pressing charges. So it turns out, any guess what Unix this came from?
No.
Where did this come from? Okay, so let's just go. We're going to play Guess That Broken Unix. So let's go rattle off some broken Unices. Obviously this did not come from BSD. Obviously it did not come from Solaris, Illumos, SmartOS. Any guesses?
AIX?
Good. Great guess. Great guess, because if I say broken Unix in the Unix word association game, you say AIX, which would be, if we were on Unix $100,000 pyramid, we would just win. I'm totally with you. AIX has got all sorts of broken semantics. AIX maps null. Did you know this? AIX maps null. It's like, well, that's a terrible idea. So you actually have a page at null, and it's got 0 for the first 512 bytes, and then it's got a bunch of other like fruity stuff above that. Like, oh, there's your PID and a bunch of other random stuff. It's like, well, that's actually a terrible idea. So yeah, AIX, totally weird. As one person told me, it's as if Unix were re-implemented by an alien race, a well-meaning, benevolent alien race re-implemented Unix. It's like, why are these comments in these strange runes that I can't read? It's like, oh yes, well, yeah, we were searching the universe for tungsten when we wrote that. It's like, okay, so no, AIX is a great guess, but not AIX. Any other guesses?
I don't know that many old Unixes.
Then we got to do Antiques Roadshow. Okay, let me tell you, it's not. It is not. It's not DGUX from Data General. It's not IREX. IREX is actually always pretty well thought out. It's not Dynix PTX. It's not. Let's see, who else is it not? It's not VNix. It's not QNX, which is not really a Unix, but it's got kind of Unix in the name. No, it's not any of these things. It actually comes from Digital Unix and then True64. It's like, oh my god, of course. So some well-meaning knucklehead at Digital basically added it, or someone was either copying the True64 semantics or the Digital Unix semantics, or I don't know. Someone did the wrong thing a long time ago. But the thing that's so frustrating about this particular example is so many people over the years saying this is broken and this is untenable and we need to fix it. And there's just a total, not just a reluctance, but a refusal to actually understand why this is such an issue, why this is so pernicious, why it makes it so difficult to develop cross-platform software, and why it now, especially as this achieves ubiquity, and now libgemmalloc, years and years and years and years later, develops this unwitting dependency on this behavior. They don't even realize that they are depending on totally Linux-specific brokenness. There's nothing in the man page that's like, hey, by the way, we were total idiots on this one, and you really shouldn't rely on this. I mean, at least if there were that, you'd be like, there'd be a modicum of self-awareness. But there's nothing. So these things end up with encoding these semantics that are fundamentally busted implicitly, and it's left to us to go pick up the trash, the garbage, and it's heartbreaking when you see these apps, and we've seen them, where it's like you look at, they're calling mav don't need on these very big segments of memory, and we, the operating system, are having to do a bunch of work to actually go purge that memory, rip down those. I mean, as you know, ripping down mappings is expensive in the operating system, right? People have this idea that, like, mmap is fast. It's like, why? Because it's 4 characters? It's like, yeah, it's 4 characters. It must be. And mmap just, it feels fast. You know, it's like pinstripes on a sedan or something. People think like mmap is fast. It's like, no, it's not. Mmap feels fast because it's the operating system kernel, the VM system, that's having to do all this work. And when you actually ripping down a mapping takes a lot of work. You know, ripping down a mapping, unlike mav-free, which is very quick, when mav don't need, I've got to go around and I've got to actually go shoot down I've got to shoot down TLBs. I got to go do a bunch of, I got to modify PTEs. There's a bunch of stuff that has to be done. And it's a very bad idea. So it's all just very painful, unfortunately. And that one's just like, well, there's nothing to be done. It's like, well, congratulations, knuckleheads. But like, this is what we're going to live in. So. It's like, we got to live in this particular body of filth for the rest of our lives. I mean, and so this is the kind of thing where it's like, this is why these semantics matter, because when you make these decisions, if you, to the degree that you achieve ubiquity, these things survive in perpetuity. And the best thing we can hope is to have mab-free implemented by Linux, which it still hasn't. Mab-free been implemented by every other system except for Linux. Hope that mab-free is implemented by Linux. Hope that gemmalloc wakes up and realizes, actually takes a stopwatch to what they've done and realizes that they made things slower, not faster by using it. And then, you know, maybe we can slowly reduce our dependency on it, but we're never getting away from it. And now we've got to live with this forever. So, you know, slow clap for that one. And it just and that again feels like you knew this was the wrong thing to do. You had people telling you that it was the wrong thing to do. You didn't listen. You, the collective body, didn't listen. And it's, on the one hand, it's like, you know, you're angry about it. On the other hand, it's not like it's even any one individual. It's an ethos, right? It's a way of thinking that's at fault here. And it's the whole idea of the fact that nobody is taking responsibility for actually setting architectural direction here. They are just, you know, taking responsibility for making sure that things don't break over what was there prior. And that ethos shapes everything about the system. And, you know, my kind of big conclusion about the kind of the difference in thinking is Linux is not designed. This is the problem. It evolves. And anything that resembles design, worse, anything that resembles design wakes up all these antibodies, right? What was the first reaction to ZFS by Linux? Rampant layer violation. It's like, wow, because it's a lot of code. It's like, yes, it's a lot of code. It does a lot of work. It's like, actually, why don't you go look at the code, see what has been done, and use your brain to figure out if this is just loquacious, logarithmic code, or if this is actually a hard problem that's been solved in a concise way, which I believe and you believe that ZFS is. And you look, this is the reason, why is Detroit still not Linux? Because they want to evolve their way there. They don't want to take that revolutionary step. They want to evolve their way into all these things. And some things you just can't evolve. Some things this is not a biological system at the end of the day. It's a software system. And some of these things you actually need to go have someone rethink it, come up with the right thing, and then be allowed to integrate a large body of work. But this explains why containers are not just a mess on Linux, but there is no container construct, right? Containers have to be in air quotes. It's a namespace. It's a C group. And namespaces were a way that Linux felt they could evolve their way into containers. But you can't evolve your way to security. You can't. No. You and I know this.
It's like,
right?
It has to be what you start with and then build the other things around it. But
you have to design it. You cannot as methodically approach security. It doesn't work that way. And yes, you got away with it with the simple stuff around, the POSIX IO interfaces or what have you. But when the going becomes much more difficult, when the path becomes rockier, and you're talking about containers, or talking about ZFS, or you're talking about dtrace, or you're talking about KQ, you're talking about things that are more involved, you actually can't just evolve your way there. You actually need to design your way there, and there's just no capacity. And in part because anybody who has that ethos, if you have that ethos, why would you sit around fighting in the slums of Linux? Come to FreeBSD, come to Illumos, come to SmartOS. As we're happy to have you. And by the way, your good ideas will cross-pollinate to other systems that share your values. So stop fighting, and that's what people do, right? And that's what I don't want to speak for you, but I assume that's one of the things that draws you still to the BSDs. Exactly. One of the things that draws me to the BSDs and to Illumos so on. So
exactly, the fact that things actually get done, and you can allocate memory, and it doesn't do stupid things.
Right. You don't have an killer. And people are like, where's the killer? It's like, what are you even talking about? It's like, where is we do killer? The killer is so deeply unconscionable, And it's I'm not even sure if you meant to set off the another prairie fire of rage with this, but the idea that we actually just rely on the fact that if we begin to run shy of resources, that an assassin is just going to start wiping people out until things are better. It's like, well, that's a terrible idea. That's the worst of all worlds. No, it pretty much is. It's awful. It's like, okay, what? Okay, why do you live this way? Why do you do this to us? It's like those of us who know a better way. It's very painful for us to hear this.
Yeah. On BSD, we have something kind of like that. When you eventually run out of swap 2, it will find an offending process and kill it. But there's a system to mark, say varnish or something, the big application that's using a lot of memory that looks like the most juicy target for your OMM killer, but is the whole point of the server. Leave that one alone.
Yes. And I think, and that's the issue. Because if you've got a resource over subscription problem, especially with DRAM, you've got a fundamental problem, right? If you're out of swap, you can't page things out. Yes, someone has to get out of the boat. The thing is that, like with FreeBSD, we do the same thing where it's like and actually back in the day, we used to, the first thing to die, because we used to kill things based on who's consuming a lot of memory. It's like, well, that's a bad idea, because as you say with your varnish example, you're killing the point of this machine. One of the things that was a particularly common victim was the auto mounter. You're like, oh God, do not kill the auto mounter. Like, you kill the auto mounter, and it's like, hey, now you have you used to have one problem, now you have n problems. And by the way, now you have a bunch of things that are trying to do things and can't, and are now allocating memory to indicate frenetically that they can't do things. It's like, you made this problem much worse. So what we did, and it sounds like you guys have done similar things, is you need to have some way of conveying to the system, no, this is more important than that. You need to have some way for the system to try to infer this is more important than that. And there are various ways to do it, and we use various tools, and you use various tools. But the point is, it's not an killer. It is attempting to turn it is an attempt to make an accident survivable. It's an attempt to turn a crash into a crash landing, really, and try to allow the system to right itself to some degree. And if it's a varnish server, get back to varnish. I mean, it's a hard problem for sure, but just and this is why, on the easy problems, when they're punting on the easy problems, that the hard problems are going to be grim. And that's, it's so you're not necessarily surprised when it's grim. What really kills me is then things that actually kind of depend on those implicit semantics. That becomes a real problem. Like, oh, don't worry, we'll just be killed. Like, I just use as much as you want. Like, it'll just start killing people. It's like, no. Oh, God, please don't. Anyway.
All right, so switch to a slightly lighter topic maybe for a minute. Twitter, I put out a call on Twitter for extra questions. We got some interesting ones. So Twitter asks, what's your favorite version control system?
Ooh, actually, I was actually a huge fan back in the day of Teamware. So the history at Sun developed something called the Network Software Environment, NSE. And Larry McVoy, who was at Sun at the time, loved the model of NSE. The implementation was terrible. He developed something called NSE Lite, because NSE was really the first bring over, modify, merge source code control system, pioneered that model. And that model just makes total sense to me. That's kind of I went straight from kind of the RCS dark ages to Teamware at Sun in the mid 90s. And wow, why would anyone do anything different? This is great because I can modify a bunch of files without you having to be aware of it. And I've got my own workspace. I'm not checking out files. I am creating a body of work that's self-consistent and then integrating that back into the system. So Teamware was way ahead of its time. It needed a bunch of improvements, but it was way ahead of its time. Larry left. He did something called BitKeeper, BK, and was still alive and kicking. BitKeeper was, I think, great. It actually made good on a lot of the deficiencies of Teamware. Then, of course, there was this kind of famous meltdown between Andrew Tridgell, who was trying to reverse engineer the BitKeeper protocol, and Larry didn't like that very much, and so he revoked the Torvalds license for BitKeeper for BK. Because the irony is that not that long ago, Torvalds didn't believe in source code control as a point of principle. Like, I don't believe in it. It's like, how do you can't not believe in that. That's not something you can
believe in gravity.
Believe in infinite mortality. Like, that's something I believe in. It's like, no, that's not a belief system. Like, that's antisocial. That's something you should express only with shame or we can give you actual drugs that will medicate away that condition. It's like a psychosis. But so he didn't believe in source code control. With BitKeeper, he kind of finally seen the light. It's like, oh, source code control. This is amazing. It's like, hey, welcome to source code control. That's amazing. All right, great. And then, of course, when the license got revoked, wanted to go write his own thing, which, of course, became Git. And, of course, Git is what we're left with, right? And Git is fine in that it is the bring over modifier. The model is right. It is, and everything uses it. And enough is right about Git that we look past all of the unbelievable rage over Git. And it is, talk about not designed. And verbs that are totally confused. It's just, Git is so profoundly, deeply confused about so many of its fundamental primitives in the way it names things. So the interface is truly terrible. Unbelievably bad.
We talked about names, nomenclature and so on. And it's like, well, let's take, checkout, the word that's meant the same thing in every version control system ever, and make it completely something different.
We'll make it something different. I think no one will be confused. And so, that's obviously, that's a major problem with Git. Unfortunately, as with Linux itself, it's good enough, unfortunately. So I, like everybody else, I've got the stuff that I cut and paste and I run with Git. I'm afraid to do anything when I go to Google something, because the man pages are useless basically, and you go to Google something to do something, and you see that the top hit you've already visited, it's been highlighted. You almost want Chrome to be like, are you serious that you've not retained this? Like, do you know that you've been to this page 18 different times? And by the way, here's the timeline. But I don't retain it. I can't retain it because it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
The verbs don't make sense, and none of this stuff actually makes so. And obviously, I'm not alone in that. But apparently, that's just porcelain, It's like interface is now porcelain. Like like I'm a prima donna because I want things to make sense. But so I get is the one I use, the one we use, but not necessarily. It's got the right model. It does enough that's right, basically.
Although, Lisa, James Mickens described Git as Git is Donnie Darko as a service, a confusing movie about time travel and parallel dimensions, and then you put your source code in it.
That was so funny. So we actually just watched that last night as an engineering team. I was weeping with laughter. James Mickens is so funny, and no, that was, and it's like one of the very few technical videos I've actually brought home, and I actually watched that with my wife last night. I love that video, his Lisa 2015 video. There's actually a bunch of good. I mean, that one is almost pure stand-up comedy, which is great. It's very, very funny. He's got his technical talks are actually great because they've got a bunch of technical meat on the bone and are still actually just as funny. He gave a talk. There's a talk at Harvard where Margot Seltzer's introducing him that I saw. That I've been going through his whole. I'm now binge watching James Mickens because I've read his stuff in Login, but I've never actually seen him present. And man, that guy is hysterical. He's very, very funny. I forget what the
first video I saw him in was, but I read one of the Login articles about computer security, and it was like, when you're being massaged upon, there's nothing you can do.
No, it's nice and the thing is, it gets to the fact that there is the sense of community that we have in Rage. It's this very kind of peculiar thing where the reality is, and we've accepted this as an engineering team at Joyent, we actually like it when people are wrong on the internet. We can deny it. Everyone can deny it. But the truth is, if everybody were right on the internet starting tomorrow, people would feel an emptiness that they wouldn't be able to place a finger on. It's, for whatever reason, we find solidarity in being upset about things. I mean, I'm sure that there's something very deeply wrong with us, but there's something that I know, and I want like a rage network. Like I want to other people that hated systemd also hated EPOL. It's like, oh wow, oh great, I probably hate this. I would, you know what I mean? It's like you want a way to like connect via the things that you don't like, which on the one hand, it doesn't feel negative, though. It feels positive. I don't know why. What's wrong with us?
Well, speaking of that, you kind of maybe accidentally coined a term earlier in the show, and I've went and bought cloudofrage.com.
Very good. Yeah, that's it. No,
live during the show while you weren't paying attention.
There you go. That's good. There's something about it. There's a fraternity in Rage that I don't understand completely, but I definitely feel it. I feel that bond. And in fact, I don't want to tip my hand too much, but Ines Simbra, I don't know if you know Ines, she's great technologist, feels exactly the same way. She and I are going to be organizing a conference to allow everyone to get our Rage out. Ooh. So look for that coming up. Could be good. It will be great, I think.
I'll sign up for that.
Yeah, there you go. I know. I feel the same way. It's gonna be great. We got to kind of figure out. And amazing. A lot of people are interested in it. So we're gonna. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So look for that. TBD coming early 2016. We're just hammering out a date, and we'll be announcing that soon.
They'll make it the same time as FOSDEM, so I can come.
Oh, when's FOSDEM?
Like January 30th and 31st or something like that.
Perfect. Yeah, it's gonna be February. Yep, no problem. We actually wanted to do it on Valentine's Day, but Valentine's Day is a Sunday. We want to do love letters to technologies we hate.
There you go.
We do it because it's not even hate. Hate's not the right emotion. It's
rage.
It's not. It's more because there are plenty of things, by the way, that I totally respect about Linux. I mean, I am not a Linux hater. Actually, I am very frustrated with it. But we all have Linux to thank for the fact that we're not running Windows everywhere, right? That Unix won in part because of Linux. So it's a more complicated emotion. It's a kind of a rage, but it's a rage that is coming out of a sense of frustration that things could be better, not that you want to actually annihilate something else.
Yeah. So I was going to ask the next Twitter question, but the FreeBSD developer chat room just noticed I was interviewing you and has started throwing questions at me live. So they're
great. Let's do it.
So journald, this is a thing. In order to log a message with journald, you open a file, you write the message in, and then send a file descriptor? What?
I mean, and this is where literally I actually forget about this because I mean, the things that most are raging on systemd are the things in the operating system that we need to support to allow systemd to work. So I actually forget the things that actually induce the most rage out of systemd. But journal D and journal cuddle, I mean, this is actually an affront again. I mean, because where does that idea come from? Like, walk me through how you could possibly feel that that's a good idea, assuming that you're not a totalitarian that feels that you need to control all information on the system. And this is where you get to like the system D problem. It's the system. If you're going to log something, it should be logged through me in a proprietary binary format. It's like, what are you talking about? And so I can't use it. And by the way, when that thing gets corrupted, you're done. Right? When that binary gets corrupted, it is so ill-informed. I mean, I almost feel like I almost want to punish whoever comes up with that idea. It's like, okay, we are now going to wave a wand, and you now have to run a system in production that only uses the junk that you just came up with. We are actually going to send you into a dystopian future where this technology has actually triumphed, and you alone must deal with the ramifications. I mean, I always want to be like, it's the ghost of technology future, taking you into the future, being like, it's like, oh my God, there's so much disease and pestilence. It's like, yes, that's because your idea has triumphed. I mean, you want to kind of get this across to people. This is a terrible idea. It's like, the unikernel thing that has come up recently. People are romanticizing unikernels, and I think you got to deal with anybody who's talking about unikernels like a teenager that's been caught smoking. It's like, you now need to run nothing but unikernels in production. I'm going to make you smoke the whole pack of unikernels, and you're going to learn when you come out of there that it's a terrible, 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 terrible idea, and that the only reason you're conceiving of this is because you don't yet have an adult mind. I mean, we know that the mind is developing well into the late 20s. So, you may think that you're in your mid-20s, but you're actually a teenager in terms of the actual frontal lobes. So you think this is a good idea, but it's actually a terrible idea. Those are your hormones speaking, and you must actually smoke the whole pack of unikernels to learn why. Now that I've got an opinion on unikernels.
So we were going to get to your response to the Sam Cutler series of tweets, but then he started tweeting new things at us.
Oh man, I know. Oof, I know. I felt he was kind of like taunting the bull, prodding the bull. I'm like, this is not a good idea. And I feel like, as if I'm gonna kind of rage as a segment, I need to treat myself like an athlete. I need to like taper properly before the actual event. I can't actually get like pre-enraged. I saw the earlier part of those tweets. I don't even want to know where he went. I mean, he was on a rip through many broken subsystems.
Yeah, just, like, why is Linux's crash management facility so bad?
He's like, no. And this makes me mad. I mean, because for me personally, and this does come to a really strong point of principle, post-mortem debugging has been so essential to me and to us and to develop reliable software at userland, reliable software in the kernel. When the software fails, we need to get a snapshot of its state to understand why it failed. And this is the cockpit voice recorder. This is the flight data recorder. And the reason that aviation safety has been able to be on a ratchet of just aviation has gotten safer and safer and safer and safer and safer. The reason is because of the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. And you look even now, with Air France, with the accident in the Southern Atlantic, AF 447, where until they got the action, I mean, it took them years, and amazingly, they actually found the flight data recorder. Until they got the flight data recorder, they didn't actually know why that plane had crashed. The speculating is because the pitot tubes. Turns out it's because there was pilot error. Pitot tubes were involved. It was pilot error. They stalled the aircraft out. We would not have known that if we had not actually had the data. So even now, we need that data. It's like, how, when you don't get a snapshot of a failed system, how can you possibly hope to diagnose this? I mean, it's like having a city that is overrun by serial killers and announcing, first thing we're going to do is close the morgue. It's like, wait a minute, what? Like, we need to actually solve these crimes. Like, no, there'll be no more crimes solved. And it's certainly, I guess it's a way of being kind of willfully ignorant, but it is really, really, really bad. And it's one of those things that, again, if you can't get kind of the obvious stuff, if you can't understand why SIG.io is a bad idea, you're probably not going to understand why you need post-mortem debugging. And you can find a screed, and this is like, I actually do need to be medicated when I read this. There's a screed from Torvalds from like 2001 where he talks about the fact that he doesn't want the system to be debuggable because making the system debuggable makes developers soft. You're just like, are you kidding? I mean, that's actually an irresponsible attitude. That's actually beyond just something I disagree with. That's actually socially irresponsible. Yeah. I do believe that we actually as technologists have a responsibility to, if nothing else, our best effort to generate a reliable system. And yes, economics will sometimes dictate things. And, yes, we're not able to focus as much on reliability sometimes as we want, but we're trying to. And the idea that we weren't even going to try to make it reliable because adding the mechanism for increasing the reliability will somehow make developers soft. What does that even mean? It doesn't make sense. It's such a medieval, it's such a medieval kind of idea. Anyway, oh man.
Okay, so now for a question that shouldn't lead to a rant.
Oh, wow. I can't wait.
Do you have any hobbies outside of open source?
I've got 3 kids. You wanted to not lead to a rant, and yet here we are. No, and actually, my kids are getting old enough now that they don't only drive me nuts, and they're actually getting old enough. I have to say that one of the greatest satisfactions in life is to be able to share your hobbies with your kids. And so I play Ultimate, and now my kids are old enough to play Ultimate. I ski. My kids are old. I ski with my kids, or I used to before we had a drought, but looks like we're gonna get some rain this year, so get some snow this year, so we'll be skiing again. It's great to do that. That kind of stuff with your kids is actually, and when you've had kind of a week of rage, the ability to go, or my son's a Boy Scout now, going hiking with the Scouts. It's very therapeutic, very cleansing. So those are the 10 things I tend to like. But when you got 3 kids, if you've got kids, you end up being pretty occupied. I've got kind of 2 full-time jobs, but that one fortunately is becoming less frustrating as the kids get older.
Cool. And was there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Boy, no, I think we've got it. Or at least for this episode of Ranting with Brian. I feel like I'm becoming like the Andy Rooney of BSDNow. Like, please, someone let me know if because I don't want to be like the old guy, kind of get off my lawn. I don't want to be. I just want someone like, let me know if I sound. I don't want to sound crotchety. I want to sound. If you're young and listening to this, if you're in your teens or early 20s, let me know if I sound out of touch. And because I want to be uplifting. I don't really want to sound cranky. I'm not a cranky person. And I actually hope that people take away from this that the aspiration to do better, not that they should be upset about the state of the world, because we actually can do better. We know how to do better. And when we look at these things that were done improperly, the things that make us upset, we can use that to help guide better work in the future. So I think they can be inspiring in that way. Trying to end on a vaguely positive note so people don't think I'm just kind of filled with rage, because I'm not. I'm not. I'm like, I don't actually bottle any of it up. The rage just kind of pours right out of me. I'm like an open valve. So, none of it it's not corrosive at all. But it is important to me that people use this as inspiration to do better, not as a way of thinking that the world is terrible.
Okay, hope you guys enjoyed that interview. Surely it will be another classic if the last one is any indication. So glad you guys got to enjoy that. But of course, we have some more news to get into here in a moment. But before we do, we need to mention another sponsor this week, which is going to be iXsystems. And of course, the address for that, iXsystems.com/BSDNow, is the landing page we would prefer you use. So you can let them know you came from here. But of course, iXsystems is running their Mission Complete project right now. So tell us what's going on with that, Alan. How much longer do we have?
It doesn't really have an end until they decide to stop doing it. But the next round of winners will be announced the end of November. So you want to hurry up and get your story in. So you just tell them the story of how you accomplished your mission using, open source, FreeBSD, ZFS, FreeNAS, whatever it is. How you used open source to accomplish your mission, and you tell them the story, and they'll pick 1 or 2 stories every month, and you win prizes. I think last month they had some Amazon gift cards and backpack full of FreeNAS swag and lots of cool stuff. But, there've been hints that there might be a really big prize coming up randomly. Obviously, it wouldn't be announced ahead of time. But you want to make sure you get your story in so that you could win.
That's right. And when they say big, maybe it'll be hardware.
Yes.
Who knows? It's got to be something.
Unrelated, I just saw they announced that the price of the FreeNAS Mini on Amazon is discounted for Christmas.
Oh, nice. So if you've been putting off getting one of those, this is your golden opportunity. Pick it up before they all disappear on Black Friday. But again, guys, iXsystems.com/BSDNow is where you want to go. And you know all the reasons why you need to choose iX as your vendor. If you've been any kind of follower of this show for a while, you've heard us talk about it a lot. But maybe it's time you go ahead and pick up the phone, give these guys a call, or send them an email, get in touch with their sales engineers, and let them discuss what they can build for you to fix whatever it is you're trying to do or accomplish whatever mission you're setting out to accomplish. But of course, we love to hear stories about that too. So if you have a good experience or something that you've done that's kind of unique or neat, weird hardware or whatnot, we like to show pictures of that on the show as well. So send that over to us sometime. We'd love to kind of hype up what you purchased, and make us all really jealous. Okay, well, we have a news roundup to get into. So first up, we have some FreeBSD building stuff on Amazon here. So what has Colin done this time?
He made a...
Or as I called it, Colin.
Yes, so this is FreeBSD's AMI Builder AMI. Builder AMI. So, Colin's been working on getting FreeBSD running on EC2 for a long time. About 5 years ago, he had it running, and for the past few years, the experience for users has been very good, where they didn't have to run a non-stock kernel anymore and worry about FreeBSD not updating the kernel and all this stuff. It was all very nice, and they recently to the point where the FreeBSD release engineering team actually publishes the official images rather than just Colin doing it, so that it's actually from a trusted source, and it'll always be there even if Colin were to stop doing it and so on. But, a lot of users just want, stock FreeBSD and then they can do their stuff. But sometimes, especially if you're doing Amazon stuff where you want to be able to scale them up or whatever, you might want a bunch of stuff preceded into your image. And that was kind of hard to do right now. It's part of the FreeBSD release engineering process. So all the scripts and stuff are in the source tree and you can do it, but it's really not that fun. Right? You don't want to have to learn how to build your own release of FreeBSD just to make a customized Amazon image. All
I need is Nginx in it. Come on.
So, say you want to install a couple packages, edit some config files, enable some services by default. He has this config-init tool that does that when it starts up, but, that's not quite the same as having it built into the image and so on. Or, if you want to take a modified FreeBSD tree and do it. So what he's actually built is the environment where you can build an AMI and then release that as an AMI. So the biggest thing is that the first time you start it does a bunch of stuff like create users and set up SSH keys. Well, you don't want that done in the AMI, right? You want that to still be put off so that when you start up the AMI for the first time, it does it. And specifically, you don't want the SSH keys generated already, because then all the every instance you spin up off of that AMI will have the same SSH key, and that's a security problem.
That's bad. Yeah.
So, for example, Colin wants all of his machines to have spiped set up in front of their SSHD and so on. And so he built this AMI that basically does this for you, because instead of having to do it and spin up the AMI, make the changes, then strip out the user that it added and the SSH key and stuff, and then make an AMI out of that, there's lots of chances for you to accidentally miss something and leave, a secret key or something laying around in this image that you give out. So this new one that basically you spin up this AMI, it runs into a RAM disk, and then you can modify the disk image on it to make all the changes you need to make, and then have Amazon make an AMI out of that, and you will be good to go.
So that's kind of like his depinguinator utility. It kind of borrows some of the same methods from that.
Yeah, which basically, boot off a RAM disk and make the changes. And so the depinguinator, what it actually does is for if you have a machine that's running Linux and you don't have console access and you need to swap it over to FreeBSD, then basically you can unmount any swap that it has access to. Then you unmount that and install depinguinator into the swap partition, and then reconfigure grub or whatever to boot off of that. So when you reboot, it boots up into this MFS root environment based off the swap partition, and then you can erase the Linux and install FreeBSD there, and then, when you're booted back into real FreeBSD, then you will just have your you can turn the swap back on and overwrite that MFS partition.
Blow away the old one.
So he mentions that it will work for any images except for the T2 micro instances because they don't have enough RAM for the RAM disk. So you can use this to build a T2 micro AMI. You just can't run the builder on the micro AMI because you don't have enough RAM.
Sure. Which isn't a huge hoop to jump through. I think that's reasonable.
And then he even talks about how the Amazon permission stuff works to actually be able to create an AMI that can create AMIs for you to be able to do automated builds. So if you wanted to, say, have an AMI of FreeBSD head and rebuild it once a week or something, or if you want to integrate your own changes or whatever, and all the stuff you would need to do that.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty neat. But anyway, Colin also mentions he hopes that this new work is going to make it easier for people to do creations of a variety of customized FreeBSD instances for maybe end users to start downloading, and you have your AMP stack set up or your WordPress or whatever, and it's already ready.
Oftentimes on Amazon, what people are looking for is FreeBSD already set up as a web server, FreeBSD already set up as a file server. And so he's hoping that now that he's made the tool, somebody else will go and do, the setup of the web server or whatever.
Yeah.
But as he shows here, you can set up an Apache web server in 6 lines of code, one of which is shutting down the machine at the end.
It's pretty simple. It's not that hard. And of course, having a package in the system just makes it so much easier now. It's just a couple package commands, configuration knobs, and you're done.
So it would be, a couple more packages to install, and then you could set this up so it pre-installed WordPress or whatever. Although with WordPress, you're going to have to update it quite frequently. But, you could very easily do that and set it up with his config.init script. So every time it boots up, it updates the packages and makes sure it has the latest not compromised WordPress.
Okay. Well, very nice. Well, hopefully this will inspire some of you guys out there if you're looking for something to do, if you have some time off for the holidays and want to roll some custom images for yourself or for other Amazon users. Go ahead and do that. And, of course, send us links to where you post those so we can highlight them and tell people what's available.
And he also says, if you find this useful, please consider a donation to the FreeBSD Foundation. As of the writing of this article 3 days ago, they were shy of the 500,000 mark of the 1.25 million goal for the year. When he did the math on Twitter the other day, we need about 30 donations a day for the rest of the year to reach the goal. And so hopefully we can make that happen.
Okay.
So the biggest thing is, the foundation needs the unique number of donors as much as it needs the money. So even if it's just $5, everybody should please just donate.
Yeah, for tax purposes, that makes sense.
Specifically, it's for the public good test. That the FreeBSD Foundation is more than just an industry consortium of the 10 biggest companies that use BSD. It's all the users as well.
Sure. Okay, well, we have some more OpenBSD goodness now. So we have a video specifically of Peter Hessler, who we've talked to in the past.
Yes, he was the very first interview on the show.
That's right. He was, it looks like, in Bucharest, Romania, not too long ago. This was recorded the 16th through the 20th of November, so just last week.
At RIPE, which is the people that control all the internet stuff in Europe. It's like Aaron. They allocate IP addresses and all that kind of stuff.
So in this video, he gives us kind of a brief status update. It's not super long. I think like 12 minutes or something. Some of that included questions at the end. But gives us a status update on some of the OpenBSD technology out in the wild, and specifically OpenBGPDD.
Which obviously makes sense for the RIPE NCC and the Internet Society of Europe.
Yeah, that's right. But watch this video, and some of the notables that kind of stood out in it that might be of interest to you. He notes that LibreSSL is now being used by iOS and OS X. And, of course, PF is used pretty much all over, which obviously Apple, BSD, and Solaris. But he mentions even on Windows now.
I knew there was a port of IPFW to Windows. I did not know there was a port of PF to Windows.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Well, I've used the IPFW and DummyNet stuff for Windows because... what else would you want to use?
Yeah,
it's like DummyNet is the best way to simulate. When we're doing video streaming testing, I usually just proxy via a FreeBSD box so that I can get the DummyNet. But the best way to simulate what happens with our video streaming when there's 2% packet loss. Well, let's ask DummyNet to create 2% packet loss and find out.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. But yeah, I was surprised to see that as well. But it is neat to see that LibreSSL is being picked up in more places. But he also gave a shout out to OpenNTPD, mentioning that as of still, there are 0 CVEs for the entire lifetime of the project. So I think that's been a good success for them. But then, of course, he gets into kind of the meat and potatoes of this, talking about OpenBGPD. And he mentions also that it's considered production ready. So there's no reason to hold back on deployment of that. He mentions that it is now considered very feature complete, able to handle edge router, route servers, multi-RIB, and of course a slew of optional features, anything you may want. So route reflection, looking glass, MRT dump, some MPLS or MPLS VPNs as well. He mentions in the most recent releases, there have been a bunch of bugs fixed, including some crashers, some different memory constraints, and performance has been greatly improved. And when I say greatly, the example he gave here was filtering performance. He's used an example of importing 561,000 rules and then 60,000 prefixes. The time of that went from about 35 minutes down to 30 seconds.
That's a pretty big improvement.
Yeah. That's a big improvement. So yeah, that's good to see. So keep up the good work, guys. But you may find that interesting. If you want to go watch that video, that could be something else you queue up after this and go take a listen to what some of the latest is happening in OpenBSD land. Okay, so you have an update on your Onion Omega, Alan. Did you already get to do new stuff?
So last week the instructions weren't online yet, but they are now. I have the link here. It's over at the FreeBSD Wi-Fi build wiki, which has instructions for a bunch of other devices of similar nature, most of them routers. But it breaks down what hardware you get with it and, some of the optional components. And most importantly, how to boot FreeBSD on it over the network with TFTP boot. And then once you got that how you like, how to actually burn it onto the flash in the device so that it will boot it automatically without having to have the network. So all the instructions there to try FreeBSD on it without erasing the Linux, and then the instructions to actually erase the Linux when you want. And if you want to put the Linux back, you can literally do the same thing and just flip the image name back to the firmware you can download from the Omega site. Because I've actually done that when so I got the device up and working, and I got it quite good, and I was quite satisfied. But then I was like, how do you use the relay switch to actually turn lights on and off? And so what I ended up doing was putting the Linux back on it, and then doing some investigation of what it was actually doing when you use the script it comes with to actually flip the relay. And I've actually figured out how it works with the I2C bus. And so with that and a bit of experimenting, I have the instructions here on how to use the I2C command on FreeBSD to actually turn the relays on and off. So I can now, if I wired it up, I could control, the Tetris lamp back here or something with my Onion Omega over the internet. And then I've got it kind of working. It's a little hacky. I don't actually understand exactly what the value means that I'm writing to the I2C bus for the PWM controller. But under booting back to Linux, I've managed to use it to build a fan feed controller for a computer fan.
Nice. Okay.
And also to dim the brightness of an LED. So regular LED, and I can set the duty cycle so that it's like 10% brightness or 100% brightness or whatever. So controlling those two. But my eventual plan is actually Adafruit has this 32 by 32 matrix of LEDs, and each of those LEDs can display like 12-bit colors, so like 4,000 different colors. And each one's individually addressable. So then you would be able to tell each light which color to be multiple times a second, and maybe draw a picture, a little animation or something. So I'm going to see what I can't build with that and get it all working under BSD to build a little BSD-powered, BSD-themed Christmas display.
That would be pretty cool. Well, you have to take pictures and document your progress on this.
So I'll keep you updated as I work through that. And hopefully maybe we can get some little 64 by 64 pixel art of different, BSD mascots or whatever, so that we can display them on the little lights thing. And see what we can do with there. That's an interesting constraint when you only have, 32 or 64 pixels. It's like we need an icon,
Yeah, it'd have to be an icon size. But, those are out there. It's not hard to find.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, hey, you got to tell us about this one here. It looks like we've had a review of the ZFS book that you guys did, FreeBSD Mastery ZFS.
Yes. This is
how did that
the book
come
that
out?
Michael Lucas and I finished writing just before BSDCan this year. Yet another person has bought it and done a review of it and kind of talked about it. And they basically detail their experience and say that, they think the book is a great way to feel confident about your skills. If you're no longer a user, I'm sure that if you're a longtime user, the reviewer is sure that you will still learn more things from the book. And the next book is still being worked on, but I am planning to incorporate some of the interesting things that I covered at VBSDCon. Interesting things you didn't know you could do as ZFS. Things that I've learned and been like, oh, I didn't know you could do that.
Wow, that's kind of cool.
It's interesting. While working on a feature of ZFS to add a new feature, I determined that it actually had most of what I needed for that feature already built in, and I just was unaware that it was there.
Well, I got to mention, Alan, I got a 5 out of 5 rating, so that's pretty cool. And the pros here, he mentions, like other books, very easy to read and understand. Very in-depth, of course, and dedicated a whole book to one file system. So it's pretty much a no-holds-barred look at ZFS. I love one of the cons here, though, having to wait for the advanced book to come out. Aww.
And the other one is definitely needing some basic FreeBSD knowledge. It even says that at the beginning of the book, and I think on the back cover that if you've not used FreeBSD before, you should start with something else. And then even then, if you're not that familiar with storage, you should read Storage Essentials first. Which basically covers, what are partitions and how they work and why you would use them. And, a lot of the words, the big words we're going to use in the book and so on.
Well, great. Well, congratulations. That's a good review to see. But of course, we'll have the link to that here. And if you'd like to get a book, you can get them off of Amazon. We'll have the link in the show notes. That may be a good Christmas gift for some of your techie friends.
Yes. So if you go over to zfsbook.com, it'll take you to Michael's website, and he has a list of places you can buy it. You can buy the ebook directly from Michael, which the most amount of money ends up going to him. But if you buy it on Amazon and leave a rating, that will probably sell more copies. So we'd actually rather you do that, but it's up to you. Also has Gumroad, which is DRM-free versions of the ebook and more friendly to EU customers. But Amazon has both the print and ebook editions in US, UK, Canada, and Germany. And you can also get it on Barnes & Noble's, Kobo, or Apple iBook, and so on. The print edition is also available from the FreeBSD Mall or Amazon.
Okay, we got a full load of Beastie Bits here. We got a bunch of questions and feedback to get to this week. Matter of fact, we have a little bit of a backlog of it. We have so much coming in. So if we don't get to your question you've written to us, please be patient. We will get to it eventually. It will make its way into a show. But before we start digging into that, of course, we want to mention the last sponsor this week, which is going to be Tarsnap, where you can go to tarsnap.com/BSDNow and get signed up in just a minute or so. You'll have an account. And then you can grab a client and start doing your backups. Or better yet, you can compile it from source because, let's face it, you're probably paranoid like we are. So not a bad thing to do. But Tarsnap makes it easy. And, of course, there's clients available for just about everything under the sun. So if you do need to go the pre-built binary route, they have that up on the website. But once you get set up, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how cheap it is for how much storage you get.
The best part is, it says you can be, within 5 minutes, you can download and install Tarsnap. I'm like, if it takes you 5 minutes, you're slow. And then just your $5 initial deposit and you're good to go. I put in $20 thinking that, I would use that up at some reasonable rate. At this rate,
no,
it's going to last more than 10 years.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous how inexpensive it is. But yeah, Tarsnap does it right. And since everything's encrypted, you can leave that data on the front end and not worry about it. As long as you're the only one who has the key, you're the only one who's going to get to that data.
Which is the way means you need to be careful not to lose the key because then no one can help you. All your data is gone.
Well,
that's the trade-off. If you want your backups to be secure, if someone tries to sell you secure backups and it doesn't have that caveat, then they're lying to you.
That's right. Because that means their sysadmins can look at your data, or the FBI guy, or the happy hacker who just found a way in to backdoor their systems everyone can see your data now. That's not good. So Tarsnap's not going to have that problem, guys. So again, go to tarsnap.com/BSDNow and get signed up today. So let's see. First here we have Beastie Bits. We have the Computer History Museum is looking specifically for a Bell Labs Unix. So we have a link here. Do they show exactly what they're looking for here?
Should they have a wish list of things they would like to get, including like 1.0 Adobe Photoshop in the box?
A picture of it.
But one of the ones is the Bell Lab Unix, any version of it. And it'd be very nice for them to get that. But they even have a bunch of old like Cisco gear they're looking for. It's funny because a lot of this old gear, I know anybody that still has it is mostly probably looking to get rid of it because it's taking up space in their garage. So a computer history museum would be a great place to donate it to.
That's right. So if you have one of those still sitting around, get in touch with these guys and maybe donate that so it can be in the museum.
I just remember that it was a couple of weeks ago, I think it was Seven got a copy of BSDI and got it installed in a virtual machine or something. And so maybe he would know the right people to find some original versions of BSD Unix.
Okay, well, next up here we have, it looks like an ACMQ portrait of Robert Watson.
Yes.
We got a link to a video here.
This is basically a 20-minute interview about, capsicum and cherry. But mostly they're not about the work specifically, but just about the concepts of it. Because ACMQ magazine is basically for programmers, and it's more talking about the concepts and the framework and so on, rather than the specific implementation or something. It's just why we want to do this, what are the challenges, what are the advantages if we got it. But it's talking about taking Capsicum to new levels. I mean, currently, in Chrome, they would have each tab. And with Capsicum, they would separate each tab so the tabs couldn't interfere with each other. But in reality, if one of those tabs is your Gmail and you're opening an attachment, you want that attachment to run in yet another separate sandbox. Such that it can't interfere with stuff. But if you think about it, there was recently a CVE against libpng that draws images. So if someone were able to inject something nasty in an image that would cause a problem, what you would really like is that when you load a web page, each image is its own sandbox, so that something that goes wrong with that image can't compromise something else on the page, or get access to your cookie that lets them log in as you on that page or whatever. But having, that many sandboxes, one for every image on the page, last time they tried it, it made the page load like it was the 1990s, right? Each image showed up individually, one at a time. And so trying to solve some of those problems in the hardware, and make the hardware do some more of the work so that we can have that level of compartmentalization without the loss of performance that just makes it impractical. But anyway, if you're at all interested in programming things or security things, Robert Watson is always interesting to listen to, and this is 20 minutes of him being asked great questions.
Great. Actually, this video is part of the collection we have next in our next link here by FreeBSD News, where they've put together a collection, basically all videos about BSD history. So we have a bunch of different things here, everything from Rick Reed talking about WhatsApp, Kirk McCusick, a narrative history. We have, Unix making computers easier to use, an original video, and then the AMCQ portrait of Robert Watson we just mentioned. And then another Robert Watson, it looks like at Bytemark, talking about new ideas about old OS security. And then, of course, George Neville Neal talking about FreeBSD, not a Linux distro.
And that talk was actually at DigitalOcean's launch party for FreeBSD on DigitalOcean. Because up until then, everything on DigitalOcean was a Linux distro, and so that's the theme of the talk.
That's right. Yeah, so if you want to get kind of caught up in a quick little video playlist, this is a good place to start. Okay, so next up we have Minix has announced they're having a 2016 conference. And where is this one located again? Do they have a location posted? Amsterdam. Okay.
It's at the university where Andrew Tannenbaum had been teaching, I think.
Okay. So it looks like it's going to be Monday, the 1st of February, 2016. It's going to take place from 9 until 1800 at the University in Amsterdam there. And they are asking for presentations as well. The call is open. So if you're doing something interesting on Minix 3, and want to give a talk about it, of course, send your proposal in, and I'm sure they would love to have you.
So I think that puts it right after FOSDEM. In which case, it's like, well, if I'm already in Europe, how hard is it to stop in Amsterdam for a day before I fly home?
That's right. Okay, well, next up we have here, it looks like a BSD talk from Chris Henshin from FB Technologies. And looks like 20th anniversary of the OpenBSD source tree. Talked about that. And of course, he mentions this episode is brought to you by the ID utility, which returns the user identity. So, and of course, first appeared in 4.4 BSD.
I love that he did that little Sesame Street thing.
All right. But yeah, you'll have to go check that out here. It looks like this is about a 6-minute interview, and take a listen to that.
So if I remember correctly, this was a technology that was running on SCO Unix and has now been ported to FreeBSD. And that's their
File Pro Plus,
which is a filing system used by a lot of like courts and stuff. So it's actually a big deal.
That's right. So what's this next one? We have Mike Larkin and Theo.
Yes, so this is videos from Hackfest, which is a security conference that was held in Quebec in Canada. Mike Larkin talked about the kernel WXRX improvements in OpenBSD, and Theo presented about Pledge, the new security technology. Both of those have videos, so it's good. And apparently they were good questions that were asked as well. Since it was a security conference, they more up to speed on specifically what they were going to be asked about.
Wow, we got a lot of videos for you guys to watch this week. It's like all bonus.
Yes.
This is great. And next up, we have a FreeBSD on the BeagleBone Black with a touchscreen display. Well, that is pretty cool. Again, similar to like maybe your Onion project here, but we have a video for that as well, showing you how they got hooked up with the touchscreen. Let's see. I think he ended up using, Linux input event protocol. He even got that working, so the touchscreen was functional. Interesting. And he has links to the GitHub repo as well. So if you want to take a look at some of that under the GPIO keys branch in his GitHub repo here.
I'll have to look into that.
See how that relates to your Onion project.
You actually had this touchscreen you could draw, and then it would draw it on the LEDs. And then like how hard you press would change the color, maybe? That's
or how many, if you tap it or something.
I don't know that would be quite as useful, but I guess if you want someone to be able to paint on the LEDs, that would be cool.
That would be neat.
Yes, I was looking more at a web interface of some kind.
Okay, well, we got a whole bunch of feedback and questions to get to right now. It looks like we're going to have John first up this week, who asked us about the Raspberry Pi 2 and BSD. He says, after listening to BSDNow for a while, you guys have convinced me to make my new Raspberry Pi 2 a file server running BSD after my new 2 terabyte external hard drive arrives. On freebsd.org, I did not see an image for the Raspberry Pi 2, only the Raspberry Pi B. So is there any of these BSDs that have a Raspberry Pi 2 image, and will it fulfill my needs to be a file server for both my LAN and it looks like Plex Media server, which will be converted from Ubuntu to BSD as my next project.
Right.
So where are those images up at, or who has
the
those?
images? I think the B image should just work on a Raspberry Pi 2. It's just we didn't rename the image when we made it work. Oh no, okay. So if you go to the snapshot section, you'll see there's actually an RPi 2 image of FreeBSD 11. I don't know if there's one of 10 because I don't know if the code actually existed in time for 10. Let me just check the 10 too. Yeah, so there's no image for the Raspberry Pi 2 of FreeBSD 10.2 because the Raspberry Pi 2 code wasn't done in time. But you can get snapshots of FreeBSD 11, which is perfectly fine to run for your Raspberry Pi 2. So I will have to make sure the download site includes a link to that.
Yeah, that would be cool. Okay, well, next up we have Roger, who writes in with a question about Windows 10 and FreeBSD. He said, I'm currently attempting to install FreeBSD 10.2 on my Windows 10 laptop. I can install the 10.2 system without any problems, but wish to install 10.2 with ZFS and disk encryption on the root partition. It's at this point that I've run into a slight problem. The hard drive has already been partitioned with a 512K boot slice and a 99 gig ZFS partition and another 16 gig partition for swap using one of the other tools in the install program. The system actually runs with this ZFS setup, but ZFS isn't using Jelly, of course. Can I use the install root ZFS program to reinstall the system, or will this destroy all the other partitions on the hard drive?
Yeah, the automatic ZFS wizard thing will destroy everything and relay it out itself because it's just too complicated to deal with what you might have already done.
Sure.
So if you want to convert it in place to Geli, what you would have to do is look at our disk encryption tutorial on the BSDNow website and basically back up all the data off your ZFS by maybe doing a ZFS send to a file and storing that on your network somewhere. Then basically destroy the pool, set up Geli, create a new pool, and then ZFS receive all your data back, and then it'll get encrypted, and then you just have to set up the boot bits.
Okay.
But yeah, there's no way to in-place encrypt a file system, and the way the root ZFS installer thing works, it erases the whole hard drive.
Yeah, kind of has to for sanity.
Yeah, there's
like
just
it's really
too many things
really
you
fast.
could do that would make it not work.
Okay, next up we have an anonymous user wrote in asking about sharing an SQL socket or MySQL specifically. He said, in my setup in FreeBSD 9.3 on ZFS, I have MySQL, Apache, and eGroupware set up in separate easy jails because of my network layout. I feel I'm best off trying to share the MySQL socket instead of a TCP connection, unless I make a loopback interface, I guess, which I have no clue how to pull off without some serious researching. Question, in order to share the MySQL socket, is it acceptable or preferred to use nullfs, or is there some magical ZFS solution I'm missing?
So before you get deeper, sockets are special, and they don't really actually live on the file system per se, right? There's a marker there saying, hey, there's a socket, but that's about it. So nullfs is probably your best bet. But your other option, like you said, is the loopback interface. So when you configure your jails, I don't know which framework you're using, but in all of them, you can basically just have a comma-separated list of IP addresses. So on your loopback interface, you can just allocate 3 new IP addresses or whatever, like 127.0.0.2, 3, and 4, and then give each one of those to the jails, and then they'd be able to talk to each other, but not go out to the internet. The other trick is when you specify the IP address, if you put like LO0 pipe character, the IP address, when the jail starts, it'll automatically create that extra IP address on that interface. And when the jail stops, it'll take it away. So you don't have to actually, in your rc.conf, define all those IP addresses. Which, maybe it's not a big deal in this case, but for me, when I'm picking up jails and moving them between machines, it means the IP address moves with it, and I don't have to do it manually. But for your SQL socket, nullfs is the best way, and it's not that hard. If you're using EasyJail, there's a fstab jail name for each jail, and you can just add the line in there, and it'll automatically create the nullfs mount for each jail when the jail starts and unmount it when it stops, which is cleaner than having to do it all manually. It makes sure that it happens in the right order and everything when you reboot and so on.
Sure. So he mentions that he asked around the forums, Spiceworks, FreeNAS forums. Let's see, someone on Spiceworks did say it's not possible because ZFS is a single file system, not clustered, blah, blah, blah.
But you would use ZFS, or you'd use nullfs on top of ZFS.
Nullfs is the way to go, yeah.
I'll have to find your question on server fault and answer it there so that people can find the answer there as well.
Sure. Okay, so now Brad writes in. He has a question about a scrub repair. He said, first of all, I'm not sure if feedback is the right address for questions, but yes, it is. We've been saying that for a long time. Feedback at bsdnow.tv is where to send stuff. So you're in the right place. But he says, I'm ZFS sending incremental backups to an external USB. It's a single drive with no extra copies equals. So how did he manage to get the message scrub repaired 8K in 56 hours, 47 minutes with 0 errors without the redundancy? Does it just retry? He said, I'm not entirely confident. I think I'll spend the next 56 hours, 47 minutes MD5ing to be sure.
Well, MD5 isn't what you should be doing. And also ZFS is already doing that internally. But so even with copies equals 1, ZFS keeps multiple copies of some things. Not your files, but the metadata of both the files. So if you have copies equals 1, certain metadata automatically has 2 copies, and really important metadata has 3 copies. If you set copies equals 2, then there's 2 copies of all your file data, 3 copies of most metadata, and 3 copies of important metadata. So it can never be more than 3. But certain data is so important, it's automatically stored 1 or 2 more times than whatever your copy setting is anyway. So in newer ZFS, there's actually an option to turn that down, to actually say, for most metadata, only keep 1 copy. And this is for databases where writing the 2 copies is actually going to slow things down.
Sure.
But yes, so it's most likely that the problem occurred in some piece of metadata and that ZFS was able to recover that from one of the other copies. So even with copies equals 1, certain data is stored 2 or 3 times anyway.
See, I did not know that.
Yes, only for the metadata. So, yeah.
But if he's having problems reading back some of the metadata, could that be?
So this is a sign that the hard drive may be having problems. Yes. Yeah. So you want to be careful with that. But a zpool scrub will be much more effective than spending 56 hours MD5ing.
Sure, that just sounds painful. Okay, so last up we have Kelly, who writes in about automated provisioning. He said, "Hi, I'm moving one step towards automated system provisioning from manual installation using BSD install and package. What are the best practices and tools available for applying an installation recipe or script and ending with a fully configured system? You can think of it as a predefined information BSD install would otherwise collect, for example, combined with a script console commands and a set of config files copied into the appropriate directories, like user local etc. Thanks for the
show. So BSD install, you can pre-answer most of the questions with a set of environment variables, and that's how you do a scripted installation, and that can work. Or, if you really dig into BSD install, it's not that much to it, in that you could just replace it with a couple of commands in a script if your answers are always going to be the same. And so then there's that. It depends. Foreman is an interesting tool. It handles everything for, like, basically you TFTP boot the machine and it installs the OS and does everything up to and installing. I think with Foreman you use Puppet. So it goes from turning the machine on the very first time plugged into the network to it now has Puppet installed, and then it hands over to Puppet to go and install all the config files and any other packages. But it does the bootstrap of the system from that. And Foreman also does the inventory management stuff of actually tracking when you're turning a machine off and when you're getting rid of it. And it has a whole framework for all that. But there are a bunch of different ways to do it. One that I've looked at is actually basically kind of like disk imaging, but with ZFS, where I would actually just have this data set somewhere that maybe I built in a VM or something, and it would just be the installed system how I want it to be, maybe minus the specific settings for like the IP address. And then when I spun up a new machine, I could just, boot off of like MFS BSD or some, USB stick thing that boots up and have it just automatically do a ZFS receive of that file. Like it could pull it over HTTP, fetch, pipe into ZFS receive, and it would just splat out a working system.
Well, you'd still have to use some kind of disk partitioning though, right?
Right, but I could script that because I say create, the 5,
just some gpart,
a gpart command, create the 512K, or destroy whatever's on the disk, set up GPT partition 512K for boot, almost all of it, a small bit of swap, then the rest for the file system, then create the zpool on it, and then fetch -o dash the URL pipe ZFS receive to the pool, and it would be done. So that's one way that I've looked at. The nice thing with that is with ZFS, you'd be able to, chroot into it or whatever, FreeBSD update to install some updates, or, package upgrade and install some updated packages or whatever, create a new snapshot and update the image that it fetches off your website, and all your newer machines would automatically inherit those new settings.
Okay. Well, cool. Yeah, there's definitely a bunch of different ways to do this. So let us know what you end up going
I'm
with.
guessing the questions that George has for me about ZFS are basically this.
Okay.
But anyway, thank you for the feedback.
Well, that was yes. Thank you guys. We appreciate you sending this in. Of course, keep those coming. So send them to feedback@bsdnow.tv because we love answering your questions and of course reading them. And we will get them worked into a future show. So if it doesn't happen the next week, just be patient. We queue them up and they'll get put into one episode at some time or another. Also, if you have other stuff, like for example, you find some beastie bits or you find some cool stories, or somebody who needs to be tracked down for an interview, send that over to feedback@bsdnow.tv as well, so we can make sure we get that on the radar and have it scheduled for a future episode. And of course, we will be back same time next week. So all the travel's done for the year. Yay. So should be normal schedule from here on out until next year. So we'll look forward to speaking to you guys same time next week.